Hello and welcome. It is February 25th. It is Thursday, and it is episode 8 of TheoryCraft. I am joined by ToD. He is a professional or ex-professional Warcraft 3 player, Starcraft 2 player, currently a top-tier broadcasting talent in both Starcraft and Warcraft. He's a poker player. He is a interviewer. He's a podcaster. He's a YouTuber. He's a streamer. Did I say streamer? He's many, many, many things. ToD, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate
Looking forward to this.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm really excited, man. I'm way out of my league here, but let's see how this interview goes. Floss, thanks for the sub, man. All right, cool. So I want to start with just talking a little bit about that memory lane video you did. I mentioned on the last stream before we were doing this interview as a little bit of like a preface. I think it's really cool to sort of preserve history like that. What was your thought behind that video?
I feel like I have a very specific point of view on like the old days and the tournaments because I lived them. And then for a very long time, I didn't realize what that meant. You know, I was there at every tournament, and I feel like it was maybe either towards the end of my career or after my career that people talked to me and they were like, so what was it like? You know, and they didn't really know. But like even back then, I was already writing like some blogs occasionally on like Live Journal, and I would try to include as many photos as possible, just kind of as to share the experience for other people to know what it was like. Because, you know, like now you got Twitch and there's so many gamers and the numbers are crazy. But back then, you know, there was not really many pro gamers that you could know about.
Yes.
Like you heard rumors and you kind of knew something, but it wasn't very precise. So now I wanted to kind of introduce that world to people a little bit better. And I just thought that making this kind of video would be fun, just basically going through tournaments and telling stories of like about each tournament, what I remember, because obviously, you know, my memory is like very blurry around a lot of them. And I still had a lot of photos like on my Facebook, which I don't really use much at all anymore. I had like 2 full albums with a ton of photos from the old days. And I called them like my pro gaming years 1 and my pro gaming years 2. And I was like, if I use that, it's probably going to be pretty entertaining for people to like, you know, get to see all these photos, hear the stories and stuff, because a lot of the people that follow me back then, they still kind of follow Warcraft 3 either like closely or not. And it's going to take them through memory lane with me, I guess, in a way. And I think it had the intended effect. I got so much positive feedback. They were like, oh, you took me right back to these years where like I would follow you. I would wake up at like this hour and then just watch the commentary or like listen to the commentary without even seeing the game and stuff. So that was the whole point, basically, is to share my old experience. You know, like a lot of people, they write their autobiography or whatever. Like for me, I don't feel like I'm close to ever doing that. Right. I'm probably not ever going to do that. But I thought that this was my way to kind of share my autobiography in this way.
Yeah, it was really cool. I think it's something that really more people should do, because Liquipedia is a great source, and I'm someone, I like to go back and watch all these old games and watch these old VODs as someone who wasn't around back then. But Liquipedia might not be something that's around forever, and esports is something that isn't always documented so well. The history of esports, you lose a lot of things, you know, like the Quake era or the Brood War era. You lose a lot of these old VODs and this history, essentially. So I think it's really cool for people to document their own history, because that's going to be on YouTube forever now, and people will have your point of view. I was surprised by how much you actually remembered from those days. You remembered specific games. Is that something you've always had a good memory for, games like that, or do you find other pros also have a good memory for stuff like that? Or
I always thought I have a pretty bad memory, but then I've just very recently started realizing that my memory must just be normal. It's just that it's not possible to remember that many things, because like I've traveled so much and I've met thousands of people at the events, and like a lot of people you just meet very briefly. For them, they're going to remember it because like I was like, I guess, somewhat of a known player in Warcraft 3. So they're going to remember this like as if I would meet somebody that's known in any domain for myself. But me, I cannot remember everybody. It's just too many people, you know, like I heard a number once. I don't know if you know about that, but like you're supposed to know about like maybe a couple hundred people, like you know, in your life, but like once you go over that, it's like very hard to remember everything. So I don't remember what was the number exactly, but I guess it does make sense. So yeah, for a long time, I always thought that my memory was really bad for not remembering everything, but only now I'm realizing that it might just be a normal memory, and there was just too much to remember for me to be able to.
Right.
And I would say, as far as the games go, from event to event, sometimes it's kind of like a flashback. I think about the events, and then usually I start picturing the country, the venue, and then maybe some of the games will come back to me. But yeah, I still consider I don't remember so much of that. Like, for example, Rotterdam.
Mm-hmm.
He has like an insane memory. Like you could ask him. He's like the Sheldon Cooper in the Big Bang Theory. He has like that photographic memory. Well, I know it's a show, but Rotty is kind of like that for Starcraft. You tell him like, you remember what happened at this event that was like 4 years ago, and he remember like every single game and everything that happened in them. It's like crazy.
Yeah,
I'm not like that, but I do remember like here and there a couple things. Certain of the games. I went through all the major tournaments in my profile, so I'm kind of supposed to remember these because these were like the high-profile ones. And usually, my run in these tournaments or the losses or my big results, they kind of like they stick with me because it was the big ones, right? But for the smaller tournaments, I probably would remember a lot less.
For sure. Yeah, I was surprised actually. I don't know how many it was. I think it was only actually 2, but I've heard a lot more stories like this from these old tournaments just sort of not paying the players. Is that like a common theme that you found with other players as well? Because I've heard it with people like Yaz and of course Happy in recent times, but I'm surprised it was happening. Well, not surprised that it was happening back then, but that it happened to so many people. So have you heard other stories, and was it just the 2 that it happened to you?
No. There was a lot of stories like that, but usually it wasn't so much the tournament as much as the teams. Like every time you would leave a team, you would get hustled, no matter what. And like changing teams was something that happened very regularly and stuff. And if you're 18 to let's say 22 years old, a person that tries to go into gaming and be a pro gamer, you don't know anything about the real world. That's like true for almost anybody. So you're not about to go and hire a lawyer and then try and recover the money that this team or this tournament didn't pay you. So if you didn't get paid, then you're just pretty much screwed out of it. And that was like the sad reality we lived in. So yeah, I know of a lot of stories. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so I'm not going to share necessarily on this subject. But I know that a lot of players, when they left certain teams, they didn't get paid. There was tournaments that didn't pay. There was, and it's funny because for the longest time I thought that, it was in esport that there was this problem of like greedy people. But I think it's just even the world kind of works like that, right? Like it could happen in any industry.
Yeah, they're just given more of an opportunity to do that within esports. Whereas if anyone given that opportunity, I'm sure working with people that are 18, 19 years old that played video games all day, I'm sure it's just there's more chance for them to screw people over pretty much. All right, so I have one more question about the video, and then I want to sort of start from the beginning of your sort of gaming career. I noticed the people on your team, you spent a lot of time on the Four Kings era in your videos. And I noticed you were really, really good friends with all those people. I was wondering, is that a lot for show? Because I was noticing you and Grubby seemed really close back then, like really good friends. Is that something were you guys really close back then, or was that just a teammate thing? Was it always like that with teammates? Or how were you feeling towards the people you were on teams with when you were?
I've always considered myself as someone who had like a very decent team spirit, I'd say, like I would like try to help my teammates and stuff if I could. It was not always necessarily the case. I know that, for example, Grubby has told a story of like how this one time I didn't want to practice with him or something, and it wasn't very good teammateship from me. And I don't remember exactly that moment or that story, but I could see that as like being true. If I was like really burnt out, for example, of playing against Orc, and I can understand how he would be pissed about it. So yeah, just to go back to that quickly. But yeah, I think back then, when I was on Arma team, I really wanted my team to succeed, not just me. When I was on SK, maybe it was a little bit less so because SK had like a truckload of players, and then a lot of them, like for example, didn't necessarily get along, even though I got along with most. There was also like some pretty controversial players, or like some very big personalities, let's say, on the team. But yeah, I didn't stay very long with SK anyway, and like I went back to Arma team because that was the better fit for me. And then when I joined Four Kings, I also cared a lot about like the team results. I think I got along pretty well with the players most of the time. Of course, you're always going to argue sometimes, but no, I think there was good team spirit. Like if you see the videos of us at a WC3L tournament, like we're not putting on a show. I'm not like, yeah, come on, you need to win for the camera. Like I want him to win, like any of my teammates. But I would say that outside of that, like, of course, we look like we're good friends during that. But I would say that outside of that, once we go home, if we live in different regions, it doesn't mean we are every day like, messaging each other on like MSN or whatever, and like we're the best of buddies and like having video calls every night, putting each other to sleep. No, like we didn't necessarily communicate that much, but yeah, we were friends, and there was definitely, I would say, good team spirit a lot of the time when we played as a team.
Yeah, because it's such an interesting thing in Warcraft, especially if you're going back to when you were starting. There was Counter-Strike teams, I'm sure Dota 1 teams and stuff like that. But that's actually a team game. Whereas you're on a team like Four Kings in Warcraft, there must be this real issue of I can't share my strats. I have to hide when I'm practicing, stuff like that. That must be a real issue. And what do you do when you find them in a tournament? Do you always try your best if maybe you're in a position to get knocked out, but they're in a position to get out of some sort of a group stage? I'm sure there's a lot of, I wouldn't say conflict of interest, but maybe. Did you find a lot of that in the early days?
Think so.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I practice with almost anybody from what I remember, at least when I started coming up. And when I say anybody, like you see me now on stream and like you see me take one loss and like go on a 30 minutes rant. I think back then I wasn't really like that. Mm-hmm. Of course, I would rant, but probably to myself in my head.
Yes.
And like I remember that when I went to Korea, shortly after I went, I was already playing custom games with Moon and like losing 20 out of 20 games. I had to practice on Twisted Meadows for this one match that I had against Zeus. And I would play like so many games with Moon, and I would just lose everything. And then suddenly I would start winning and winning a little more. And then suddenly we'd go 50-50. Then suddenly I start winning a little bit more. And I was like, God damn, I'm getting much better, like especially on Twisted Meadows. And then I played against Zeus, and it felt like easy mode in comparison. Like no offense, but it was much easier. So I think I just wanted to practice with pretty much anybody, but there was definitely eventually like some rivalries where it became harder sometimes to practice with people. Mm-hmm. Like I knew, for example, if I would practice with Zachards, I thought it would reduce my chances maybe to beat him in a tournament, but I still occasionally would practice with him. Mm-hmm. Maybe with Grubby, it was the same. So yeah, practice became really weird at some point because people started countering each other a lot more. So the best thing that could happen to you is if you found a very good player of a race that didn't yet play in those tournaments. And that's where I got lucky. For example, like back then I had a lot of trouble against Undead, maybe like, I don't know, 2006 or something. Yeah. And I found TH, and back then he played random and then he switched to Undead. Mm-hmm. And I was practicing with him and I was like, this guy is amazing. Yeah. Like this guy is going to be one of the best in the world for sure. And he wasn't even known at all yet. Mm-hmm. I think WNV just had picked him up, and they had like Fov and Xiaoti, who were like far higher profile players than him, maybe Czech as well. Yeah. And I remember practicing a ton with him. Like a lot of it was on Turtle Rock, and it was always really hard game. And then whenever I would play against another Undead after that, I was like, this is so easy. Like I'd already play literally like the best Undead against human. And for a very long time, he didn't play in tournaments. So he was like the best practice partner anybody could have at the time, and I got lucky with that. But yeah, you weren't always so lucky. Sometimes you had to practice, with the other very good players, and there's always multiple ways to do things. You can play like the secrecy card and then just practice not showing anything, or you can just do the thing where you're like, I'm gonna be so good that it doesn't even matter if my opponents watch me. And there's a little bit of both. Like if you look at Moon, it doesn't stream a ton. It's sometimes hard to watch his games, and like he's like really good in tournaments. A lot of top players, they stream a decent amount, but they don't always play like 100% serious when they do stream. And that's kind of because of that.
Yes.
And then you got like a Hitman. He's not streaming 24/7, but he's streaming a lot during certain periods. And the thing is, he's so good mechanically. He's so solid. He will scout you. It doesn't matter. Study him all you want. It's not going to give you a particular edge against him unless you're one of the best in the world. But then if you are, maybe you don't need to study his games from his streams. From the tournament will be sufficient. So there's always like these two styles clashing with one another. And I think you always had to wrestle with that already, like back in the day, kind of decide which approach you want to take. And you would switch from one to another depending on periods in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a perfect example you made. I was going to bring that up myself. Like, Moon, of course, being the player that always has a different strategy. You don't know what you're going to face when you play him in tournament. And then Hitman, someone who's even said himself, I don't care if people study me. I'm trying to find the most optimal path. So two very different players, and this sort of knowing their strategies only really counters one of them, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I always wondered about that. And of course, there's always a story from the top players. I've heard you speak about it and Grubby speak about it, what you just touched on, trying to find that lower level player that's still good enough that you get some practice out of it, but they're not going to beat you in tournaments. And then they're, of course, happy with it because, they're getting practice with the best player in Europe potentially, right? So it's this relationship, but you got to find the right match, sort of thing. Find that tier 5 Night Elf player to practice against, then you can finally beat Moon. Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I've heard a lot of people speak about that before.
Some players also, they don't need to necessarily practice with that top level opponents to get really good. Like, I'm going to take Hitman as an example again. Sometimes, he wants to get better against Elf. He'll play custom games with Arc.
Yes.
Now, no offense to Arc, but this is definitely, 1 or 2 tiers under Hitman. And you would think, because there is like a skill gap and they're not the same tier of player, maybe this is not the most useful to him. But that's the thing. He can still work on stuff from these games. He can still figure out timings, things that he should be doing, and stuff like that. Conor McGregor, for a very long time, he sparred with a guy called Artem Lobov.
Yes. Yeah.
Which many people talk about him saying he's the GOAT as, sarcasm, because he has a pretty terrible record. He's like, actually, I can look it up.
Yeah, he was on The Ultimate Fighter when McGregor was the coach.
Yeah,
right? That's
yeah,
where
yeah.
I know him from, yeah.
Let me see. What's his record? So he has 13 wins and 15 losses. And then this was the main sparring partner of Conor McGregor for years while he had his rise to the top. He became a double world champ. So it's like kind of weird. You look on one side, you have a guy that many would say, is like definitely not the greatest fighter. And then you got Conor McGregor, who became a 2-division champion. And you're like, how did sparring with this guy help him this much? But that's the thing. Like, it doesn't always necessarily have to be with the best in the world. And, when they say iron sharpens iron, it still works out as long as you just practice with somebody else that's like, has a certain skill, obviously. Like, Artem Lobov, like I said, he's like 13 and 15, but he's not like a terrible fighter by all means and stuff. He's just not championship caliber, but it was definitely a good spar for Conor for him to get as good as he got at fighting and win multiple world championships.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good example. It doesn't necessarily have to be the best in the world, but it does have to be someone who's competitive, and luckily there's always going to be a lot of people for each race like that. And that's funny that you found TH early on. Wasn't he an Orc player originally, or was he an Undead player originally when you first started playing against him?
I think he may have been random.
Okay, yeah.
And then he started playing a lot of Undead during that time. And I just remember playing him. It's funny because, like, how memory works. I just picture myself in my apartment at the time, which for some reason I remember very well. It was my first apartment when I moved to China, to Beijing. And I just remember playing a lot of games against him as Undead, and then just getting really good in the matchup thanks to him, and then going to tournaments and having to face like, Lucifer or Suseria, and then in comparison, it just felt easy to face these guys because I was already playing like a guy that was like an absolute beast all the time.
Yeah, and it's funny how many players back then, like even Infi, wasn't a top player yet. I think until about maybe 2007, 2008, he wasn't getting strong. TH, of course, wasn't strong for quite a while longer. 120 wasn't known. Sock, Che Miko, Fortitude. None of these players, WFZ, none of these players were even top yet. Like Fly was around a little bit, Lin was around a little bit, and they were competitive, but there was almost a completely different scene. All the top players we see now, which people might not know, are none of the top players you were seeing pre-2007, 2008.
Yeah, it's rare. It's just like Moon, and that's it, you know? Like, it's like the immortal one, Like,
yeah, and somehow he's been competitive the whole time. He's always reinvented himself. I don't know what that is about him, but it must be the strategical as opposed to the Hitman style of purely mechanical, refined play. Maybe that strategical thing works for him more so, and he's the only one that sort of perfected it. Maybe.
I think like Moon is one of those players, you see him and you're like, okay, well, this guy was born to play this game pretty much. Yeah, Toxie says Lin was around. He was around, but Lin wasn't as good. Also, he's also one of the players that, like, like if you look at Moon history, like from Reign of Chaos came out and he was already one of the best. And he's been one of the best the whole time. Whereas Lin, he was kind of a good player, but actually it's funny, like I didn't even remember some of these results. I beat Lin a bunch of times in like some of the Stars War events, like the team match in China. But he started getting really good, I would say maybe like 2007, when he beat me in the finals of IEM. He was definitely quite good. He's also had some up and down, but he's also become like maybe the second best orc of all time after Grubby, I'd say. Like some people would probably say first. And that's a big discussion, right? Like it's like, who's the best of all time? Like, do we count more what happened back then or now and stuff?
Well, yeah, that's weird because as someone like me, I started playing in 2010. If you ask me who the best orc of all time is, I wouldn't even think like Zakard or Grubby. I would automatically say Lyn. It's got to be Lyn, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it's going to be Fly, and then maybe Grubby third. But if you're from an earlier era, 2005 to 2008, you probably almost immediately say Grubby or someone else. You would never say Fly or Lyn, really, which is interesting because Lyn now is so dominant, so much more dominant than I feel anyone playing orc at least has really been, maybe with the exception of Gravy, but it's just not obvious to someone who hasn't been around for that long.
Yeah, I mean, he was for a while, but last year and this year, I don't think it's been that
Mm.
amazing, right? Like, Fly has been doing well, Focus has been doing well, was Lin. It's a bit more up and down. Like, he just got 3-0'd by Sock.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas, like, before, he had, like, the longest streak of, like, being undefeated against a human for a very long time. Then he started losing against human. I just think his motivation, it's hard to keep your motivation that high for
Mm-hmm.
that long, for so many years like this, playing one single game.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's the same in like traditional sports. I would assume that's, they also face their challenges, the
Mm-hmm.
athletes, but with games, it's really like that. You're always going to have the occasional burnouts that you need to deal with. Sometimes you need to take a break, you come back stronger. And it really feels like it's like that for Lenny. He didn't even hide it. He said it in an interview. It was like, I'm kind of sick of the game right now. And then,
Yeah.
he's playing really bad, then he's playing well, then he's playing really bad again. Like, we don't really know. That's why it's all the more impressive that somebody like Moon managed to be as good as he has been for so many years, because
Mm-hmm.
this guy, I'm 100% sure that sometimes he's sick of Warcraft 3, like, or just of playing games, and he would like to do like something else or like play another game, but he still somehow manages to always show up and always perform and always go deep in tournaments, and that's very impressive in itself.
Yeah, Moon's almost someone who's never been disappointing from. It's actually someone I'm going through their Liquipedia history. I'm watching sort of all of his games, and he's never not been impressive. From his first tournament in 2002, he's always been dominant. He's always been innovative, and he's always surprised people. Like I watched a game he did in 2003 on Lost Temple where he just dropped 4 glaive throwers and Night Elf Mirror, and it was like his opponent just lost his main base because he wasn't ready for it. And he's always been doing that stuff. And then someone like Lynn, you mentioned that sock series he did recently for the New Year's Cup where he got 3-0'd, and he looked just really kind of uninspired. Like he's been someone, maybe, I don't know if you'd agree with this, probably the best against human recently as an orc player, better than Fly, better than Focus. But he looked really uninspired when he got 3-0'd there. He was kind of doing the same old stuff, and Sock was just doing that rifle style and just killing him almost every single game. Did you notice that at all?
Yeah, for sure. I watched those replays, obviously. Like,
Mm-hmm.
anytime a high profile player loses to a human, I want to be watching that to try and learn a bunch myself. Yeah, I mean, if it's a combination of Sog being hungry, practicing hard, this guy's definitely not burnt out. He's like one of the new guys, at the top of the pro scene.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can see that, like, he's working extremely hard, training a lot, and he played really well that series. But yeah, Lin, on the other hand, for sure, this is not his best games.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what it is. Like, sometimes it's weird because you only get bored of one matchup as well.
Mm.
Like, you could have like 3 very solid matchup, but there's this one matchup where you're like, I'm not feeling it like that. And it goes in waves, like sometimes I feel very motivated to play Human Mirror, but then sometimes I have a couple breaker games and I'm like, this is just so stupid. And I really don't want to play that. And I know that, I don't play many tournaments, but I know that if I play in a tournament around that time against a human, I'm almost always going to lose if it's like a good player. So
Yes.
it's weird, how that works. Like, you need to convince your own mind that victory is more important, and then let's forget about this for a while. But it's very hard sometimes. You're just burnt out.
For sure. Yeah, and I want to get more into that sort of mentality side of things too, but I think we should probably get into maybe the beginning of it. I was wondering about, you talked a lot in your videos about your sort of first tournaments, but I'm wondering, before you ever sort of installed the game, what was your history in gaming in general? What sort of games did you play? If you could get me up to the point of you just installing Reign of Chaos, I assume it would be.
I think I must have been like maybe 3 years old or something like that when the NES came out.
Yeah.
And then that was the first console that I got. So pretty early I got into gaming. And I remember the one game that we had was Teenage Mutant Turtle,
Yeah.
which
Okay.
I never finished. And it's funny because like not long ago I mentioned that in like a podcast or whatever, and then somebody made fun of me. I'm like, I was 3 years old. What are you making fun of me for? Like, yeah. So that was the first game, and then after that, I just kind of went from console to console. I kept upgrading. I went to I can't remember exactly all of them, but I went from NES to like Mega Drive maybe,
Okay. Yep.
to then like Super Nintendo, and then like some other one, like PSP along the way. I played a lot of console.
Yep.
And then one day, finally, I discovered PC gaming. And that's when the real master race kicked in, like a brand new world opened up.
Yep.
I don't remember what I was playing first, but it must have been something along the lines of a little bit of Brood War. There was also some Command and Conquer. At first, I think the first RTS I ever saw was probably Command and Conquer. And I was like, this is amazing.
Yep.
The little planes taking off on the runway and stuff. I was like, I want to play this. Like, this is what I want to play from now. I was like, immediately, I knew that was it. And then I started playing a lot of Brood War. And I think back then I played in Internet Cafe. And we were playing kind of what everybody was playing. So it was some Brood War. I dabbled into Counter-Strike. I played a lot of Counter-Strike.
Okay, yeah.
I was actually very decent, I think. Like, I don't remember which version it was back then, but we played a lot on like Mansion and stuff. Maybe it was like 1.5 or I don't know.
1.5, 1.4, something like that.
Yeah. And then I was playing in an internet cafe called Magic Cafe in the south of France in Marseille. And that's when Warcraft 3 came out. And I had been on the team of this internet cafe for Brood War and for Counter-Strike. And now we were going to build a team for Warcraft 3. And two players from the team picked Night Elf. One of them picked Orc. So I was like, well, it's either undead or human for me. And then I just played both races. And funny enough, back then, I was really bad. Like, I just installed the game as it came out. I was playing a lot of 2-on-2, almost no solo. My build, it's funny how I remember that. Like, it's so weird how memory works. My build was 2 Rax Footmen with a blacksmith and upgrades. And I thought that was the best thing. I was like, I'm going to be so good at the execution. And one day I played against these undeads. He made necromancers, and he had a giant army, and I lost everything. And I was like, this is the most broken thing I've ever seen. So I started playing undeads, and then I made necromancers, and I was like, not only is it not that good, it's also really boring to do this. So I went back to human. That was my only rest switch maybe of my life. That was for this very short time where I played undead. And then I went back to human and then practiced hard. And initially I was a 2-on-2 player, but then I realized that, solo was always going to be more popular, and that was probably where there was like a future. So I started playing a lot more solo. But before that, Brood War, Counter-Strike, I think were like definitely the two main games that I played on PC.
Were you aware of, you say you were sort of on this small team that was going to play Counter-Strike and Brood War. Were you aware of esports at the time? Like, were you aware of big Brood War names in Korea and stuff? Because there wasn't obviously Twitch or anything back then, but like Boxer? I read somewhere that you were a big fan of Boxer back then.
Yeah. So back then, there was like almost nothing, just a couple articles online, like maybe like Team Liquid or whatever. So I knew who Boxer was. I knew that there was a couple of foreigners that went to Korea and made a career out of that. But I knew Elky a little bit. Like, he came to my city in the south of France for a tournament, a Brood War tournament, and that I played in. There was like all the best French players. And I was kind of starstruck with some of them because I just knew them by name. Like, most of the very good players, they were from Paris, so they were from the north. But now all of them came to the south of France, and they played in this internet cafe with like all the best players from France were there. It was like a lot of players. And Elky won, obviously. I met him along the way, actually, and I 4-pulled him. I played multiple races, but at this time I was playing a bit of Zerg. I 4-pulled him. I won one game.
Right.
And then I was like, he's for sure going to be ready for it the next game. So I didn't 4-pull, and then he obliterated me. Like, he made a couple of wraiths, killed my overlords. He tank dropped to Zerg. I was like, what is going on? And then I was like, okay, well, this guy is pretty good. And then I watched the replay, and I was like, he was totally not ready for the second 4-pull. But I was like, do I want to be this dishonorable to 4-pull him twice? Right. I wonder if he actually remembers that. I think next time I meet Elky, I'm going to ask him. Because last time I was in Vegas for the World Series of Poker, I had dinner with him one time. But I didn't ask about that. So I need to remember next time to ask him. But I 4-pulled him, and then I didn't go that far in the tournaments, but it definitely gave me, it's kind of like a reality show. You see like all the personalities, who are the good players, and like who does well because of what. So it was kind of the same. Like, there was a player that was really good, but he always choked in live events, and he got really nervous, and he even forfeited his matches. So I saw this guy, I was like, I don't want to be that guy. And there was like these really, really good players that just worked super hard, and then they showed up at the event and they beat everybody. And I was like, I want to be this guy. So in Brood War, I was pretty young, and people were like already very far ahead, and maybe I wasn't very talented for the game. So I got decent, but I was never really that good. I was mostly a 2-on-2 player. I played for Team France a couple times in 2-on-2. I think we won some of our matches as well. But I wasn't amazing. But I knew that if there was another opportunity, maybe on another game, maybe I would try to, get better and stuff. And that's what I did on Warcraft 3 eventually.
Yeah, were you right away, was the team that you were playing for Arma team then, or did you find them a little bit into playing for Warcraft, in Warcraft?
Yeah, so I was on Magic for a bit. That was the internet cafe that I mentioned.
Yep.
And we had some of the best French players, actually. Like in the very starts, there's this guy called Overmind that I've known for years and years. He was the best French player, I think, at the time. He was a Night Elf player. His specialty was Night Elf Mirror, where you would go tier 3 and mass hunts, and you could only get bounce upgrade on tier 3.
Right.
And then it was just mass hunts against mass hunts. And he was the best at execution of that. And because we had so many good elves, you would just beat them all in Mirror every time and win. And at some point, Arma Team was an internet cafe in Paris.
Okay, yeah.
So they announced that they found Intel as a sponsor, which back then is like, it blows
crazy.
Everybody's mind. It's like, what? A team sponsored by Intel? And so they were going to have budget to build a pro team on Warcraft 3. And the way they wanted to do it is by Mortal Kombat. They wanted to do a tournament at the internet cafe and figure out who was the best players and then just recruit them. So everybody went to Paris. Like, I mean, most of the good players were from Paris anyway, but me and my crew from the south, we traveled to Paris. Funny story, we didn't pay for... actually, in the south of France, when you take the subway, you get a ticket, you put it in the machine, you go through, and then at the exit, there's just a rolling thing. Then you come out, and then you don't have to present your ticket again when you come out, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So you just have to buy a ticket. When you go in, you put it in the machine, then you get out, and then you're fine. And usually at the entrance of the subway, when you put in your ticket, that's where there is like what we call like maître chien. It's like the guys with the dog, guarding it, so that you don't fraud. So anyway, we go to Paris, and then I think somebody picks us up because we have to carry our computer and stuff. Like we're gonna rent monitors. It's like CRT is a complete shit show.
Yeah.
So we arrive in Paris, and then we have to go like a couple stations further to where the LAN is gonna be or whatever. And somebody had a car, so they pick up the computers, and then me and this other friend, Overmind, we have to take the subway. So we go there, and we see an open door. So we're like, oh, sick. We don't have to pay. We just have to go through. So we go through, and then eventually we get to a station we have to transfer. I think it's called like Châtelet or whatever. It's like one of the big stations in Paris. And suddenly we go down escalators. And as we are getting down escalators, there's a giant line of controlling people with that jacket and everything. We're like, oh, it's fine. We'll just go out. And then that's when we realized that in Paris, it works differently. There is doors that you have to exit through with your ticket that you have to print. We're like, oh, fuck, we don't have a ticket.
Yeah.
So then we're like, what do we do? What do we do? And then my friend tried to go and talk to them. And I think we didn't even have ID cards or whatever. We were just like totally YOLOing. So we're like, people from Paris and Marseille, they don't really like each other. So we're talking to this guy, and we're like, oh, yeah, no, we're from Marseille. And he's like, oh, Marseille, huh? He's like touching his mustache like this, like you just did. And we're like, oh, we're so fucked. So anyway, we got fines.
Right.
Basically. And then we went to the LAN after that, and it was just... Yeah, that was one of the LAN, but that wasn't actually the tournament that I was going to reference. It's just a random story. I remember
that wasn't the Mortal Kombat. That wasn't the Mortal Kombat one.
Yeah, that was in the Mortal Kombat, actually. Yeah. That was the tournament, I think, maybe a little bit before that, if I remember correctly. Maybe after, but I think before. And that kind of gave us an idea of who was where in terms of who was like a really good level.
Yes.
I think that the player that won this one was a orc player who actually, this guy multi-raced.
Okay.
I think he was initially Chinese, but then he moved to Paris and he was like playing violin. It's like so random that I remember that. Or like cello. And then he played like Warcraft 3 part-time, and he switched race, and he would do tower creeping on Norwood, and he was really good at it. And he won the tournament like that. But yeah, so this leads up into the big Mortal Kombat style tournaments where we all go to this internet cafe called Arma Team, which is really big, lots of computers. All the best French players are there. And back then, I would say I definitely got quite nervous at tournaments, and also I wasn't that great yet in solo, so maybe I choked a little bit, and I probably did lose to pretty good players. I don't remember who exactly. So I didn't do very well, so I was obviously pretty depressed because I knew that was my shot at joining the team. But my friend won it over mine. Right. So he was automatically in the team, and I think he was literally the only player that they recruited initially. Intox was there as well, too. I don't remember where he didn't make it to the finals. Like the second place finisher was an undead called Valhalla. It's funny because like this guy was kind of like not great mechanically. If you would watch him play, you'd be like, how is this guy even good? But he made it to the finals. So this guy, eventually they recruited a little bit later on. And then I was just kind of trying to talk to them. I was like, just recruit me. I'm like really good in 2-on-2. I'll be better in solo eventually. And then they were very reluctant. And that kind of made me also want to work very hard. So I practiced super hard and then eventually got good in solo. And then when I started beating all the good French players, they had no choice but to recruit me. So that's how eventually I made my way onto Arma team. But I wasn't on the team from the get-go.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. That's something I actually wanted to ask about is when you come into a scene like this and you've been around for Brood War and you know some people in your local scene, but the idea of finding players back then before social media, before streaming, before there's these big broadcasts and tournaments, the idea of actually just finding out who the best is. And it's so funny that you brought up, there's just a tournament. They just saw who the best was. They just got us all to meet in one place and play. That's so interesting. But like, was that the main way that people were finding talent back then? Like, yeah, you guys just play each other and we'll pick who's the best out of you by the eye test? Or was there some other way, like ladder? Was that important back then? Who was number one on the Europe ladder, stuff like that?
There was ladder for sure. There was a couple of cups here and there as well to see like who was doing well in those. But yeah, I would say ladder was probably like number one. Usually if you were very high on the ladder, you were doing pretty well and you were one of the best players.
Yeah.
Like the best player at the time usually was rank 1 on ladder. I've always attached a lot of importance to ladder in a certain measure, I would say. Like as long as the game is like really big and everybody's playing the ladder. Like for example, right now on Warcraft 3 WT Champions, I feel like the ladder is maybe not as good as an indicator because, a lot of players, they don't play each other. The scene is not as big as it was back then, but it's still a pretty good indicator. Like if Hitman and Happy are rank 1 and 2 of the ladder, they're probably the two best players, that are playing on it. Other than the Asians, but they don't play that much on it. I think that's also why they are not higher ranked. But I've always thought it's a very good indicator. In Starcraft as well.
Yes.
Like I remember I went to a tournament in Poland one time. It was an international tournament and I was rank 1 on the ladder and then I was just practicing like crazy and I made the rank 2 in the finals and I won the finals. So like so many times I've realized that like, whoever's rank 1 on ladder is a pretty good indicator of who should do well in certain tournaments. So yeah, ladder always was a thing, but I would say tournament results always were a little bit more important. But back then there were like not many offline events. There were like every few months here and there. It was mostly like online cups. So that was a good way to see who's where.
And was ladder pretty much the main way people were practicing back then? You would, of course, play custom games, I'm sure, with people you knew. But were you guys doing things like nowadays we'll go to Netties? Would you go to like the Korean server and practice on there because you knew that's where the most of the top players were, I'm sure? Or was there just pretty much playing Europe ladder in-housing with people that you knew for the most part?
I played a lot of ladder almost exclusively. I didn't play much custom games, at least during the early parts of my practice. When I did go to Korea eventually, then I played a lot more customs because I had to practice for a specific match. A lot of people had to practice for televised games. So if somebody had a match against human and they asked me for games, then I would play a ton of customs with them. But that was maybe the only time, or like maybe during a WG, because you only have one match to prepare for like a week or two, then it makes more sense to play custom games. But the rest of the time, it's only ladder pretty much.
Right.
For like almost everybody, I think.
Do you remember who was rank 1 ladder back then? Were you rank 1 in like early 2002, 2003 at all, or was someone else that maybe we don't even know anymore?
No, I don't really remember. I think that eventually Deadman was rank 1 for a while.
Yeah.
I think I was maybe also for like a short time. I think Insomnia was probably like before that, like in the early days, also one of the guys that was rank 1. Yeah, I don't really remember specifically. I think that some people have like random screenshots and stuff that you can look at where you can see that.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, because Insomnia was on top of the world back then. He won the first WCG. He beat China Human, which I've never seen him in another tournament again in my life. I'm not sure if he goes by another name, if you might know. But yeah, Insomnia was one of the top players, probably the top player in Europe back then, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, it was really good, but the first tournament that I refer in my video, Walk Down Memory Lane, which is CPL Cannes,
right,
in the south of France, Insomnia lost in the finals to Intox. That's when the Ancient of Wars were busted, and he uprooted all the trees and slapped him to death.
They were fortified and uprooted, right, back then?
Yeah.
Oh my god. That's ridiculous.
Already back then, I told them they should nerf these Ancient of Wars, and still to this day, they're Ancient of War creeping any camp on the map. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? How long is it going to take you?
Yeah, the game was absolutely ridiculous back then. I'm sure it was totally normal to you guys, but like watching back some of these old Moon VODs, Night Elf Mirror would be you'd both pick up a Naga from the tavern and you just trade Frost Arrow hits until one of you dies, and then you'd go into like mass ancient war rush against each other. It was just total almost nonsense back then. Was there I'm assuming there wasn't too many replay sites back then, but how were you learning the what is called the meta of the time, this mass huntress style you mentioned, stuff like that? How'd you find out about that?
By playing a lot and then talking to people. I remember that in the early days, I think it was maybe the second Star League or something, Elky was playing and he was playing Night Elf and he made it to the finals. And I think he had to face Medusa Saint.
Okay.
So there was this guy who was a human player in Korea doing really well and he beat Elky in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I practiced with Elky for that. And I think I was just mostly freestyling myself when I was playing back then. It was like a mix of units. I made a couple tanks here and there. I killed some of his trees. I would win some games. I would lose some games.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I figured out that Medusa was apparently doing double Sanctum.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Archmage MK double Sanctum. You creep a bunch, you get casters. So I started doing that. And I was like, this is super powerful. Mm-hmm. So that's how I figured out one of the early builds that I used a lot personally. But yeah, like, if I remember my first French championship that I won, for which I wasn't particularly the favorite, I made Bloody, like the best French hunter at the time in the finals. Mm-hmm. And I think about the games, I would be like, what the hell is going on? It was like on Norwood, and I would go like for some rifles, then into knights. Mm-hmm. And then I would just like, I was really good at creeping still to this day. It's like one of the things I like doing is creeping a lot, getting high level heroes. And I just kind of out-crept him, and I crept like the big golems on Norwood, and I think, I don't know, maybe I got an infernal or whatever. Like the items were ridiculous back then, and then I went like that.
Yeah, you described yourself as more of a in your video, more of a micro player back then. So I'm assuming it was just get high level heroes, take a fight, sort of win, but it was all more intuitive build order wise, and you just try to out micro people.
Yeah, I would say so. Mm-hmm. I don't really remember what my builds were like. Like I know very well what my builds are like right now.
Yes.
Or maybe in like 2007, but the early days, they're like kind of blurry. I don't remember like what I was supposed to do, against Elf. Like probably expand a lot of the time and stuff.
Yeah.
I think Human was really good at this age. Maybe that's why you like you didn't have to do shit. You just expanded. You made whatever units you wanted, and then you just won because the map pool was like Truncail Path and like Lost Temple, which is like the best Human maps.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, looking back on those old WCGs and even earlier tournaments than that, the maps are, well, it's all in 240p, but the maps I can't even barely make out because I've never played them in my life, but they're always big maps with lots of expansions, and of course WCG 2002 was Human Mirror Finals, and in Reign of Chaos, I'm pretty sure no race really had any healing other than priests, so like I think just mass creeping with Rifle Caster back then I've heard is really strong as well. Was that something that people were doing, just creep the whole map for a lot of gold with priests to heal everything?
Yeah, you could creep to level 6 as well.
Yeah.
And Human had the best tri-hero back then. Like Archmage MK Pala, like, everybody knows that if you played in an FFA game and you got hero 666, like, you might as well leave. Like, they're going to kill an entire army if they can. Of course, before we got nerfed into the ground, like right now.
We will talk about that later, by the way. Don't worry.
The tri-hero was really sick, so everybody kind of knew that, and I was good at creeping, so it worked very well for me. I like to play with bigger armies as well.
Yes.
So I would just creep a lot and do well.
Cool. So then you're on Arma Team, 2002, then you're on SK for a little bit, and then in 2004, late 2004, you joined Four Kings. So how did that go? How they find you? What, maybe specify what time that was? I just have 2004. I'm not exactly sure when, but how'd you get into Four Kings? Because that's a pretty big org at the time, even then, I think.
Yeah. So at the time, there had already been a team that went to Korea, which was, I don't remember the name that they played as, but it was the SK guys. So it was Mad Frog, He-Man, Insomnia, and Dominator from Norway. So they went to Korea and they played with one of the teams, maybe France or something like that. And so we were going to be pretty much the second European team to go there and then try our luck at like the TV, the televised leagues.
Yes.
And they had already Grubby, Fury, and Zeus going. So that's an Orc, an Undead, and a Night Elf. They wanted to get a Korean player. They got Fov, who was the SWC champion at the time. So that was another Undead. So they really wanted a Human. and they just kind of made it known, or like it was known, like everybody knew they were looking for a human. So obviously, if you're Four Kings, you want to get one of the best humans. Who are the best 3 human in Europe at the time? That's Fatsi, He-Man, and Insomnia. It's not me. I'm maybe 4th. Maybe I'm top 5.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew they were interested in these guys, but I knew that a lot of these guys were probably not interested because Fatsi has always been like, studying and job oriented. I knew it didn't take gaming like as the most serious. Insomnia already went to Korea. I didn't particularly think he was going to be interested. And He-Man kind of also not interested. And I thought there was a chance he was also like going to be on his way out and maybe stop the game or something.
Right.
So I remember just talking to them a bunch and telling them that, I wasn't the best human player at the time, but if they would give me my chance and send me, I would become the best human player and like do a lot better. And I don't remember how it went exactly, but I know that eventually they were like, okay, like we'll take you and you'll go to Korea. And I was like, this is my dream coming true. I don't know if it's even possible to describe what that's like. I feel like many people will not have the fortune that this will happen to them in their lifetime. So for me, that was my dream. And I was like, this is sick. Mm-hmm. Just before I went to Korea, so they were already living to there, but I had my WCG qualifier. So they left before me, they went there. And then I had to play my WCG qualifier in Paris. And again, I live in the south of France. So it's like many hours of train. I go to Paris every time. Like the level of dedication, I think people might not know because now, you just fly like in a heartbeat. Whatever, it's so easy to travel. It's like so justifiable to travel for esport. But back then, it's like, I'm just like YOLOing on this thing. So I go to Paris, I play my WCG qualifier. I beat Fatsi literally for the first time ever in the finals.
Yeah.
Like before I've even really joined Four Kings. So I was like, nice. Like I'm already showing them, that I'm really hungry for this. Mm-hmm. And then I traveled to Korea and I started practicing with them. And yeah, that was just really kind of how it went down. Like they were looking for a human player. I lobbied hard. I got on my knees. I begged.
Yeah.
It's funny because I don't even really remember, but I just know that I talked to them and I was convinced that I could become one of the best back then.
Yeah, because looking back on it now, it's of course probably the most legendary Warcraft 3 team of all time. There's probably debate for a couple of other teams, MYM, stuff like that. But looking back on it now, it's like, oh, you guys were just made to be a team together. You were winning everything. But, of course, there's always some steps up to make it into there. And then, of course, you go to Korea with them. And was that your first time in Korea? And what was the sort of difference between living in Paris and practicing there, or living in France, and practicing there, and then moving to Korea? What was the difference in infrastructure and practice and culture, I guess, overall when it came to esports?
Okay, so it's a very different country. Like when I got there and I saw like the buildings and stuff and like the population density, it's like a lot of people in one place. Even though Paris is like pretty crowded, it's like got nothing on Korea. You got like a lot of taller buildings. Any real estate, like the apartments will be like way smaller. And because there's so many people, there's like a real demand for like a convenience store, for example. Mm-hmm. So where I lived in the south of France, you have 0 convenience store that are open 24/7. In Korea, they're at every corner.
Yes.
There's an internet cafe every block. So it was definitely very different. And I kind of embraced it and liked a lot of aspects of the country. When I first moved there, I don't know if he was trolling us, but we had a manager/translator, and he definitely failed to provide us with good food experiences. So I actually hated Korean food when I moved there, which is weird because now I would rate it maybe like one of my absolute highest foods in the world. So yeah, I think maybe we got trolled or something. I remember one of those, so we had an apartment which was really small. We all lived in it with all the Four Kings guy, and then we would go to an internet cafe. And I think I moved there when it was winter. So it was really like Korean winter is insane. It's so cold. So we would walk to the internet cafe, just kind of like be dying from cold. And for food, we would order a lot of stuff to the internet cafe directly. We'd eat fast and then get back to practice. Mm-hmm. I remember one of the things that he ordered one time was like pig's feet or pig's foot or whatever, which was disgusting. Mm-hmm. And like all of us after that, we had like such a low opinion of Korean food, even though like this is literally the only time I've ever seen that. And I lived in Korea for years after that. And like Korean barbecue is one of the best things in the world. So yeah, I don't know what it was, but yeah, at first we didn't like that. I remember that we had a place that we loved going to with the other guys, which was called, I think it was like Skylark or something. Mm-hmm. It was like kind of like Western food, but like Koreanized version, like not very good.
Yeah.
Their pizza was like a piece of paper, like paper pizza. I remember like one day Zeus ordered it, and then after that he rented for like a whole week. He's like, fucking paper pizza, man, and stuff. It was so funny. And every day we would go there, and like they didn't speak in English, and they were like, oh, here comes the white boys again. Like they would just smile and like give us some menu, and we'd always order the same thing. You know, like I think maybe Fury was getting like the chicken fingers or whatever. Like we were like so ignorant, basically.
Yeah, and so you didn't have sort of, you're still going to internet cafes for practice back then. Was there any big orgs that had like, you were living in an apartment together, but had like infrastructure, like a team house with a practice room in it, or was that just not even existent back then?
I think it didn't exist in Warcraft 3. Everybody, I believe, at this time played from home. It never really resembled, as far as I remember, the Brood War scene, where like obviously they had big teams, big sponsors, team houses, and then everybody was living there and practicing there.
Yeah, because looking back on, I've seen some documentaries from Brood War back then, and I don't really know what it was like for Warcraft in Korea at that time, but for Brood War in Korea at the time, it was massive. Like, you were a superstar, you had a big team house, they all had fancy jackets, they had nice computers, you know, still the big monitors and everything, but back then it was still like, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference if the computers weren't so bad, pretty much. But I'm sure it got to that point eventually, maybe not that early, but maybe a little bit down the line.
If Warcraft 3 ever got to like this point where there was like multiple team houses, there were a couple sponsored players that were even on some of the teams that were Brood War teams.
Yes.
But I can't remember ever hearing about any proper team house for Warcraft 3. I feel like Warcraft 3 in Korea, you know, it was somewhat popular, but it was still very minuscule compared to Brood War. And that's been for the whole history of Brood War and Warcraft 3. Like, it's never even come close.
Right.
But the funny thing is that happened in China instead. Where there you actually had team house. You know, WNV, they had like FOV, Czech, Shouty, and then eventually TH, all practicing in the same house. Even mouse sports. When I was on mouse sports, we had a team house eventually. It was in Guangzhou.
Yeah.
There was Fly, Yumiko. I don't remember who else. Maybe Sai. And I remember that eventually even Sase moved to Guangzhou and lived with them for a bit.
Yeah, because you lived in China for a while as well, right? You lived in Korea for a while and China. I think you said Beijing for a while, right? You moved all around Asia?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't actually know that. I didn't know you lived in Asia at all. I thought it was just Europe for the whole time. So that was kind of interesting to know. Did you think that you sort of had to be in either Korea or China at the time to sort of make the most of this esports thing, to get the most exposure for tournaments and good practice? Or was it just you enjoyed the culture and you wanted to be in with your teams sort of thing? Or do you think you could have done the same being in Europe?
I think it was both. I had already been to Korea, so I knew that living in another country was not very hard for me. And I don't think that most people's view on being a pro gamer is, you know, living with their mom or whatever.
For sure.
So I definitely wanted my own independence. And back then I was already traveling a lot to Asia for tournaments because that's where most of the tournaments were. So I was like, most of the tournaments are there. That's where the best practice is. I'm just going to move, make my life a whole lot easier. Because before that, for a while, I would just travel individually to like one tournament to China and then back. And it's like, you know, sometimes you travel, you lose a couple of games and that's it.
Yes.
That's the end. So I was like, it'd just be better to move there. And eventually, like one day I was just like, I'm going to move to Beijing. Sase wanted to move there. So we went there, we hunted apartments for a bit, then we found one, and we both moved to China.
That's crazy. I can't even imagine. You must have been pretty young at this time too, early 20s, mid 20s when you did that.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I was young.
Yeah. And like for me, that would be nerve wracking. Were your parents pretty supportive of all that stuff? Like, I'm going to move to China and Korea and do esports full time. Were they pretty into it, or did they not get it? Because still my parents don't understand this whole thing that I do, and it's 2021, right? So I imagine it was difficult back then.
I think they were all right with it. Like, my parents at first, they were against me being like this massive gamer that plays all the time. But then once they saw that I started like being able to provide for myself and actually made a living out of it, then they started supporting me immediately. So I don't think they quite fully understood exactly what it was, even though sometimes I would try and explain them. But I think they also knew that there's nothing they could say anyway to stop me. So there was no point.
Cool. Yeah, and now we're 20 years later, and here we are, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So getting into like, we're probably into maybe 2005, 2006 here, a couple years playing for Four Kings, stuff like that. How's the landscape of Warcraft 3 changing from where we were previously? The balance of it, is there still uprooted, fortified ancient wars? Is there more tournaments? Is it growing? Of course, Sky is coming on the scene around 2005, stuff like that. How is the landscape sort of changing and the balance of it with that, I suppose?
The balance changed over time. There was not like very regular patches, but if there was a big problem, then eventually it got patched out. Like, in the early days, that was the Ancient of War. They were like really stupid, and then that got patched out. There was the famous 1.14 patch. It's like 2004.
Okay.
Maybe? No. Maybe 2004. I don't remember exactly. Where like at ESWC, it was like the one that 4-1, where it's like 500 in the top 8 because destroyers absorb mana, and then the mana wouldn't go down
right,
up until you shot. So it's like, what the hell? So yeah, that got fixed eventually. So yeah, there were some patches here and there, but I don't remember the specifics or like how often and stuff as far as patches go. And for the tournaments, there started at some point being more and more tournaments in China or in Asia in general. Sometimes it was Korea, sometimes it was China, mostly China. And there was at least minimum one big tournament per month, usually in Asia, occasionally in Europe with like something like SWC or a WCG maybe somewhere. But yeah, a lot of tournaments in Asia.
What sort of players were you learning from back then? Like I mentioned Sky, but was there other people other than Sky, or Sky was really the guy to watch his replays and the guy to look out for in terms of humans?
Yeah, I didn't really learn much from Sky because we usually had very different styles. Right. So I will watch his games, but usually this is not the style that I would want to play necessarily. But there was always like some good players, like early in my career, like Insomnia was a big inspiration. And then also like I would say guys like Survivor, He-Man, Fatsy, I looked up to a lot. There was always a couple Korean humans here and there, like WCB Rainbow, Swain in the early days. And then eventually in China, there was always like a rotation. China is like, it's kind of weird in this way where there's always been a very weird rotation of players that appear and then disappear. You mentioned China Human, but it's like, whatever happened to this guy? Finished second in WCG. I feel like we never heard of him after that.
Yes.
And there was always these players like that. In one of the early Akon, there was an undead. I forgot his nickname. But he also was one of the best Chinese players and then kind of vanished. And then when I was doing the Walk Down Memory Lane video, there was so many names like that I saw.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I remember that guy like Wulin or whatever. He was on World Elite. And I'm like, whatever happened to him? Then he just vanished like from one day to another.
Yeah.
And then another guy took his place. So other than for the top guys in China, there was always like a rotation under that of like tier 2, tier 3 players. And maybe that's because the Chinese scene was so big and it was like kind of competitive that aside from the absolute top guys, then there was a lot of people at about the same level. So that's why from one tournament to another, we could be seeing a completely different phase. And yeah, actually, that's an interesting evolution of the scene. It's like initially, I don't know how big the Chinese scene was, but I'm assuming that it was kind of big in Korea and in Europe, but not necessarily big in China. And then the big game changer was Sky. These guys started performing in international tournaments, and suddenly it felt like everything changed. He alone develops the Chinese scene so much, not just from performing well in tournaments, but it seems like he was always ready to exchange and practice with anybody. And then suddenly the platforms, the Chinese platforms, had so many players, so many good players, and like we're almost like one of the best places to practice. Right. And then I think a lot of these guys, they were like kind of like me when I was a Brood War player. They just saw this game and they were like, this is my chance. I want to practice hard and I want to get there. Not many people do, but many people played and tried. And, guys like Fly, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Went to his first big international tournament that I can remember, PGL, and he just like beat a whole bunch of people, myself included. And I was like, where's this guy coming from?
Yeah, I remember Grubby used to do his old replay casts and stuff like that, and I remember him mentioning the same thing about Fly. He just came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's this Chinese player that we all have to study and compete against. But looking back when I was watching your video, I noticed, because it's always been common knowledge, at least since I've started playing the last 10 years, that China's number 1, and then Korea number 2, and then Europe, and then NA, and that's sort of how it's always been. But looking back at those, Korea really had so much more talent than China, and it was almost
Yeah.
Europe had more talent than China as well. I was really surprised by that exactly until Sky comes on the scene, and then you start to get players like Ted and Fly, like you mentioned. Eventually, a couple of other people, but those are really probably the big three of China at the time. And was
Yeah,
Sky, sorry, go ahead.
Suho was really good, I think,
Suho,
also early days.
yeah,
But yeah, they had a lot of players. Shouty,
Shouty, yeah.
I think, in my opinion, very underrated. One of the best players of all time from China. Yeah, they had a lot of big players over time, for sure.
Yeah. Is it because I still have yet to really study too many Sky replays. Is it true? Everyone always says he's really aggressive. He is the most aggressive player ever. Is that true of Sky, or is that just folklore at this point?
There's never been anybody for who it's more true for than
Yeah.
Sky. Like Sky was against Night Elf. Watching his replays was like a very weird experience because he gets a Naga, he buys a health potion, and then he never stops pushing. He just goes in front of the Night Elf base and he says, well, everybody plays Demon Hunter. Naga is good against Demon Hunter. You're going to have to dive my hero if you want to be able to do anything. I have a health potion. I'm getting casters behind.
Yeah.
And he would just do this every game. And he was so damn good at it that they never played against anybody that played that style. And also, even if they did, it wouldn't have been done as good as he was doing it. So he would just kill people like in 5 minutes all the time. It was like, if you watch Happy now, like you see him do his push, he loses 0 units. That's kind of how it felt like to watch Sky play against Elf, at least. And me, I was the opposite. Fast expand, 80 supply, then I fight
Creep
with my
up.
upgrades.
Right.
I bring in the militia, whatever, 80 supply, double healing scroll, 1 protection scroll. But he was just attack, and just smash everyone.
Yeah, and a lot of the other humans had that style of like your sort of style back then too. A lot of towers, tanks. A lot of the games you were watching, going through your tournament history, a lot of tanks, a lot of expansions, stuff like that. But Sky was always, even against Orc, he was the one. Maybe again, it could be folklore that he developed that Sky push style, the Beastmaster second against Orc. Was that his strategy? Because for players like Moon, who they say he invented towns, but really it was Magic Yang. Was that Beastmaster second Sky push style something that he actually developed, or was that something you guys always sort of did, if you remember that strategy from back in the day?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I would say he was probably one of the main guys that popularized it. When you say somebody invented something, it's always hard to know exactly because, you say Magic Yang. Maybe Magic Yang took it from someone who then took it from somebody, so you can never really know. But I would say Sky definitely was one of the guys that popularized this Beastmaster style and the Tower Rush and stuff. But I don't know if he came up with it.
Which is very counterintuitive. It's weird that he is probably the best human ever. I mean, in a lot of people's opinion. I know you said that on your stream as well. And he plays it completely counterintuitive to what human is about. They can power build, they have good towers, they can expand. That you said their heroes are very good late game, so they can creep up. It's completely counter to what human is supposed to do, almost, it feels like. Yet he's the best of all time, which is very strange.
Yeah, I think the casters were also really good, and he understood that, and he just understood timings better than most people. And he understood different strengths in the early or mid game that you can use compared to most people as well. So yeah, like you can't just think about human in terms of like, yeah, they're very good late game, and that's like the way you should take it,
right?
And always go for that. I compared it to the happy push earlier. Like obviously Undead is one of the best nuke in the game, but it doesn't mean that they should creep the entire time.
Yes.
So I kind of feel like it's funny because like I just thought about this today, like just now while doing this interview. If you think about the way Happy plays now against human, he's just pushing the whole time. And then if he goes to the late game and he has high level heroes, he doesn't mind because, the nuke is going to be really good and his heroes are very good. It was kind of the same with Sky. I think he understood that very well. And he understood every timing about those early game attacks that he did, especially from the moment he got his second hero. And that's what made him really good.
Yeah, understood the small nuances. Not overall, he obviously understood the big picture as well, but the small, tiny nuances. If I do this much damage to your Demon Hunter, you won't have Moon Juice, and I can hit at exactly this timing, and I have enough gold for these 3 towers, and then I'll kill you. The very small details that are almost more complicated than the big picture, big macro stuff, but of course you have to have the whole bag of tricks. I have a sort of loaded question for you, but let's do it anyway. For players that are really dominant, we've talked about Moon so far, and Sky, and of course Grubby and yourself. Nowadays we're sort of in this scene that has a tendency to try to exclude the top players, as you mentioned. Happy, we have a lot of tournaments that ELO capped, and also in North America we're having issues with that too. I call it issues. Personal opinion, may not be an issue, of course. Was that something going on back in the day? Were there players like Moon and Sky excluded from tournaments because they're simply too good, or was the draw always there and no TOs really excluded them?
Yeah, I don't remember any sort of region lock ever being part of Warcraft 3, but I don't think it's a big thing nowadays either.
Not big.
The only case I know of is the Scale Cup, which I think, so they're hosting their cup, like obviously like very passionate people. They're hosting their cup every week. And I think they just saw that Happy was winning it every week and that maybe the signups kept going down and going down. So they wanted to try something different. So they put a skill cap as to say, let's see if this can increase the amount of signups, because obviously they want to keep on sponsoring it. They want Warcraft 3 to stay alive.
For sure.
And yeah, it's a weird thing about having an as dominant player as Happy is, I guess, in the scene, is that there's some viewers that are going to love it. They're going to be like, oh yeah, Happy's the best. I love watching him play. He's crushing everyone. But for some other people, they're going to be like, oh, we always see the same guy win. It's like so boring. I don't even want to tune in anymore. He's going to win again this week. So it's a little bit split, half. Maybe not half and half, but it's a little bit split, like between two opinions.
Yes.
And yeah, I think they just wanted to try something. So they did that. And then I think the signups maybe didn't go up for at first, but now maybe they're going back up a little bit again. It's hard to say as well, because around the time the lockdown started for COVID is when really like the numbers for Warcraft 3, I think, were doing really well in the signups for these tournaments. And then they started going down. Maybe people got bored or whatever, or they went to other games. But these days, I would say like the tournaments don't seem to be doing too bad. Ideally, like all the people that like Warcraft 3, we'd love to see 100, 200 people sign up for these tournaments, the weekly ones. I think that'd be amazing. But these days, we're not that close, I would say, to those numbers.
No, I don't think so. No,
it depends. Like today, I was paying attention to there's the new Bronze Cup, which I think is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And the prize pool depends on how many people sign up.
Oh, okay.
So if it's 60 people, it's 60 euros total. If it's 100 people, it's 100 euros total. And I think initially there was 120 plus something people signed up, but some of them maybe have signed up a few days ago, so they didn't even check in. So I don't know how many people ended up checking in.
Yeah.
But the grid still says the round one is round one of 128 or whatever, but there was a lot of buys. So let's say maybe they got 80 or 90. I still think that's a pretty good number, and it's a great initiative to do a cup like this. But yeah, back then, to answer your question, I can't remember having like this sort of region lock for much of anything, and I don't think it's really a thing anyway these days. Yeah, this is literally the only cup that has done that, as far as I can think of. Can you think of any other one?
There's been a couple others. There's been, I believe, one other cup that did it, that excluded. It had an ELO cap of like 2,400 or something, and then there's been a couple in North America as well. But as I said, it's a little bit of a loaded question. Of course, it could be a great thing, could be a bad thing. I think the skill cup silver is nice. It even makes me want to play it, having those sort of caps and stuff like that.
More champion next week.
Yeah, exactly. maybe I'll try. There's a lot of pressure on me ever since Remo Demo won a cup. Now I got to win it, but he's a lot better than me, so I'll see if I can pull it out. More so, I was wondering, like, was there this overall, because in North America, there's of course a frustration that Hitman's so much better than everyone, and there seems to be somewhat of a frustration with some people about how good Happy is, even with some of the viewers, like, this guy, will he ever lose? Was there anything like that for Sky and Moon or anyone else back in the day? Was there always this, I want to get to the top, or was it like, there's nothing we can ever do, we can't beat these guys?
Yeah, not that I can think of. I think there was a lot of very good players, so nobody was really that dominant to the point where you're like starting to hope they're going to lose.
Yeah.
And I think also, maybe in Happy's case, it's about his likability, like Moon and Sky, like, they're not my closest friend, but if I hang out with them at tournaments, I'm usually having a good time or like some decent discussions. With Happy, maybe not so much. He's like a very direct guy, and, he's just very straightforward. Like, he doesn't make really much jokes from what I can tell. Like, he kind of sticks to himself. And he's not always got the best of ways with the words either, right? Like, sometimes you talk to him and like, he'll make you feel like you're a complete idiot or whatever, like with the way he's answering, or like he has. Let me translate that word, because there is this specific French word I want to use here. That he has contempt for you.
Okay. Yes.
basically. And it's kind of weird because I feel like for Hitman, it's almost the same.
Yes,
like he's
I was gonna
he's
say
a
that.
no-nonsense guy
Mm-hmm.
who sometimes has a terrible way with words.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just caught up on his discussion on the WT Champions about the host bot, and I was like, you show up on their Discord and then you talk to them like, like they're, peasants compared to you. But these guys are like the volunteers that put up the server that you play on for free every single day. Like without them, you're playing with way worse lag than like you would be now if you play on WT Champions. So you shouldn't do that. But I think a lot of them, they don't understand that very well. And I think about Happy, a lot of people have noticed this, and that's kind of what maybe makes them root against him at times.
Yeah, not necessarily
perhaps.
just the dominance. And of course, Sky and Moon, you say it yourself, but I've heard also from every interview I've watched in the past, they were like true champions overall, not just in the game, but outside the game. They, were always very sociable and everything like that. I'm wondering, what is your take on that, the War 3 champion stuff, the ping restricting and putting everything on one server? Do you have a take for that? Because it could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. Lots of people have different opinions. Hitman, of course, has the most different opinion. But do you have a take on that?
I feel like there is no perfect solution in that. Like Warcraft 3 is not a game with like a giant player base, and like if you give, like I would have loved initially that if they could just give us the option to pick which servers we want to play, like in Dota.
Yes.
The thing is, in Dota you have millions of players, like daily, almost. So you're always gonna find a game no matter what. Here, if you do that, I'm gonna turn off Mumbai for life. So that means I'm never ever gonna play against guys like Seiso and stuff.
Yes.
And like, do we want guys like Seiso to be at home pressing play game, and then 3 hours later they haven't found a game because nobody wants to play on freaking Mumbai, so they never get a game unless they have like 200 MS on something else. Then it's not really a global ladder. So it's a very difficult problem to tackle for WT champions and somehow make work for everybody. I think if you look at it from either side, you're going to have a very biased opinion. If you're like a WT champions person or one of the organizers around it, or maybe Neo, you'll look at it and you're like, these entitled pieces of shit. Like they dare complain about like, we gave them a global ladder, we do reduce ping with host bots, and they dare freaking complain. But if you're a hardcore player, let's say, dare I say it's a player with a good level, playing with 130 MS is not your idea of fun.
Yes.
So like for me, I find playing with 130 MS very difficult. And I've mentioned this many times on a stream recently. I don't know if it's because the ping is inaccurate, like it shows 130, but in reality it's maybe like 200, or if it's because I've been spoiled for so many months because the server was in my backyard. I think like there was one in Amsterdam, maybe one in Frankfurt previously.
Yeah.
And I play with 20 MS for like more than 6 months now. And then I'm like, when I play 130 MS, this feels like the laggiest thing I've ever played. But I remember back in the day, I would play matches from China on like US West to play in the IEM qualifiers.
Yeah.
And I still somehow got through, So I can't tell which it is. But yeah, I want to be understanding of the people making the decision and wanting a global ladder. But I know that at the same time, for me right now, I don't see myself in any sort of near future as being wanting to play on the Mumbai server, which is my highest ping that I'm supposed to get on any server, with around 130.
Right. Okay.
And like to anybody watching that doesn't experience this ping regularly, they're probably thinking, 130, like you're such a diva. That's the thing though. When you play with 20 MS all the time, it's like so hard to play 130. I think even the 100 MS pings beats US East or Russia Central. They feel super laggy for me.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because I play like very strong opponents all the time. If I play US East, usually it's Hitman. And when I play Hitman on US East and I think I had like 98 or 99 MS, and I think he had like maybe 87.
Yeah, around there, yeah.
Yeah, and I sent my walker to the mercenary camp on Echo Isle at 14 o'clock, and he sent his, and I pressed P, and he got the fucking priest, and I lost the game. Yeah, that's when I'm like, okay, I don't want to play on this server because this is just silly. But that's the thing. Maybe this action itself is silly, and even if we had the same ping, like how are you going to decide who gets the troll priest, So
yes,
it's hard to manage for everybody. I kind of want to be understanding. Like in the time, I've ranted a lot about WT champions and their decision to still allow these servers, but I rant a lot. I should shut up more for sure, because I really appreciate their work. I even told Floss recently about this. I was like, even though I rant sometimes, I really appreciate all you guys do, and that's all I'm doing is ranting when I get one of these servers and I have to play with lag. So Yeah, that's my take. Like, my take is I don't want to be the guy to have to make the decision of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's the same as with balance. People always ask me about balance, and I'm always like, I don't want to be the guy to make the decision, because I know I've talked about balance a lot in the past, and I still, I complain a lot about Undead, for example. But when somebody comes to me and they're like, so what changes would you like to see? I'm like, get out of here. I don't even want to answer you, because I don't want to be the guy that, gets blamed for balance or whatever. And I think it's an impossible job anyway. Like, who's going to balance this game and do a good job? Like, there's just nobody, it feels like, that could somehow pull this off. Everybody's going to get mad at some point about one thing or two that they did. So, yeah, that's my take. I'm trying to be understanding on both sides, and I hope we can find some sort of resolve that works for both parts, like the players that want to play with lower ping, and also the people that want to make this a global successful ladder.
Yeah, I suppose there's three sides to it. There's including everyone you mentioned, including, say so. Some people he just won't find a game sometimes unless he's playing against people, in his country around. And then there's also the idea of getting the priest, and they could do what they used to do on old Battle.net, which was force everyone to have 300 ms delay to balance that out. No matter what, you played with 300 ms, which of course nobody wants. And then there's the idea of, I'm fine on 150 ms. Like, I personally, I don't feel it, but I of course understand when you're competing on the top level, Hitman doesn't like playing with over 60 ms. Do you have a sort of range where you're comfortable playing, like under 90 or under 70? Where you like really you'd like to always sort of play in that range?
I would say around 80 at the most. I'm kind of fortunate because I live in Germany, so I have good ping to almost anybody in Europe, and it's the most active region. So I do feel like I should be able most of the time to find games with these guys and not play with higher ping. But I'm a little bit surprised at what 100 ms feels like, to be honest. Right. And like I said, I don't know if it's because, they were still working on the build. Maybe that can be reduced the way it feels later on. Maybe they can improve like the connectivity or whatever. Obviously, we're limited by the physical side of things and how internet lines work around the world. But from what I remember, like you asked me earlier, like, I played a ladder and stuff. I used to play on US East from France, and I believe it was 100-ish ping. And I got really used to it. And like, honestly, I didn't mind the ping that much. Maybe it's also because the players were fucking terrible on that server and I beat everybody like playing with one hand, but
nothing's changed.
Whereas like, no, it's not the case anymore. But yeah, playing on East now feels very unpleasant, I find.
Yeah, I really think it's whatever you're used to, I would say.
Yeah. Even when I played on NetEase and at 200 ms, it was bad, but I somewhat got used to it after playing on it for a few months. Whereas like now I've played with 20 ms for so long, you put me on 100 ms, I'm like worth nothing.
Right, yes, for sure. All right, I'd like to touch a little bit, obviously it is a Warcraft 3 show, but I'd like to touch a little bit on just your transition from Warcraft 3. If I got my dates right, you took a break around 2008, 2009, you played for a little bit, and then you eventually switched to Starcraft 2 in 2011, is that right? And how did that transition work for you? Did you play the beta? Were you still competing in both at the same time? How was that for you?
Yeah, so after I quit Warcraft 3, which is not necessarily my last recorded tournament on Liquipedia, because I think I played like WCG in China while being retired.
Yeah.
Just because even though I had retired, I was still the best French player. So I went to the qualifier in Paris, qualified, went to China, and then lost to maybe Happy or something. Yeah, so I had a break for a while. I was kind of fed up with Warcraft 3. I think in particular, the Blade Master was really tilting me back in the day. So I was like, I'm not having so much fun with this game anymore, so I'll stop playing it. So I stopped for a while, and I was taking it easy. I wasn't doing anything in particular. I was playing some poker. I was doing a lot of sports.
Yeah.
I've always had this attitude that when I'm a pro gamer, I just want to practice a lot. And I'm like really tunnel visioned on the game in practice. So I will literally not go outside at all, not work out, not do any sports. When I lived in Asia, I did club quite a bit. I would say that was like my one thing where like I would just go out and like enjoy and stuff. But other than that, I still played a lot. Funny story, actually, one day I was going to go out with friends and they met at my place and we were going to go to a club and I was playing some games and I lost the game to Shouty and my blood was boiling. I was like, you guys go ahead. And they were like, are you serious? Like, you organized this night out? Like, no way. I was like, get the fuck out of my house. I need to beat this guy before I'm going to go to the club. So they left without me.
Yeah.
And then it took me a while, but I won a game eventually and I went to the club. But yeah, I wasn't doing much else than playing, and I always took practice seriously. And the losses are always what pushed me, and I always lose a bunch. And it's still kind of the same to this day, even though I'm not nearly as dedicated as I was. And so when I stopped playing professionally, then I started doing a lot more sports. I played a lot of football, which I really got into. I was playing like 3 times a week and stuff.
Yeah.
And I moved back to China actually for a bit, even without playing War 3. And I was hanging out with like Zakart, Fov and stuff. I was even on a football team with them. And then one day I got like a pretty bad knee injury because some dirtbag just like ran into me without caring about anything. And then like I just fell over and like rolled really badly. And I went to see a couple doctors there, and like it was really weird. They would all give me like different diagnoses. Some of them were like, "Yo, you need to get a surgery and stuff." I was like, "What?" I was like actually really surprised because even though it hurt, I never thought I would have to get that. So I was like, this doesn't feel very good to like have a language barrier around that. I want to know what's really going on. So I'm gonna go back to France to see like what's really going on. So I moved back to France, and I had already been playing a little bit of the beta of Starcraft, but not much. Just a couple of games here and there. I was like terrible. I was always playing Void Ray, like Rush, whatever, like some BS. So I go back to France, and I cannot do sports, even though I was doing them like literally almost every day. And I have a computer. So what's happened is that I started playing. I had no intention of becoming a pro gamer ever again. I started playing, and I think within 2 weeks, I was in the highest possible league on the European ladder for Starcraft, which was very competitive. And I was already beating some of the biggest names. So I was very surprised. I was like, this is surprisingly kind of easy. Because, I put in the hours and I took the game seriously and I really tried to improve. So next thing I knew, I was already becoming a pro player on Starcraft II, and I got picked up by Millennium, which is, I think, the last team I had played for in Warcraft 3 while I was retired.
Yes.
Because I needed a ticket to go to Paris to play in the WCG. And they were, like, obviously, I was a very high-profile player. So when I told them I need a ticket, they were like, snap call. So they sponsored me and sent me there. And then I played that as Millennium. And so I joined them, and then that's how I started playing StarCraft initially. But I had absolutely no intention of ever being a pro gamer again initially. I got dragged into it.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't actually know this about you, that you played so much Broodor before, but that probably helped you out a little bit, although it was, it would have been over 10 years ago. But did you find the Broodor experience helped you, and was the Warcraft experience very helpful? You said you were ahead of the competition sort of thing. Did you find that a lot of the skills transferred over?
I mean, it's an RTS, but it's still like a different game. Yeah, maybe a little bit, like for Brood War, mostly from Warcraft 3, though. In Warcraft 3, I've always liked the macro games. I'm not much of a rusher, like as we established Sky earlier. I was more of a guy that liked to go for 80 supply. I get the reputation of doing it with towers, but it wasn't always with towers necessarily. Like Night Elf is the main matchup that I think a lot of people remember me for. And my main strategy against Elf was, they would go Demon, they would go Naga, and I would go Archmage, Naga, Breaker Caster, Mortar. And then I would just like take good fights, sometimes couple Invis Mortar with the Archmage in the main, a Naga in the Expo to Fort Lightning the Wisps. Next thing you know, you're winning. So yeah, I think that helped a lot that I was already like a more macro-oriented player because, StarCraft initially, that's kind of all that was. But in StarCraft 2, I would say there was more micro initially than Brood War because I played Protoss, and you had a lot of spells to use, starting with the Sentry and Force Fields, which was very micro-heavy. So that's kind of what attracted me also to Protoss. There's multiple reasons, but I've always thought that Protoss was maybe the best race for any ex-Warcraft 3 player, and a lot of us played it. Grubby played Protoss, Hazuops,
Hitman,
and like many other.
Both of them, yeah, it seems really common. That's actually, I didn't play a lot of StarCraft 2, but that's what I played too for the same reason. It seemed like the most heavy investment into a single unit at a time is how it felt for me to play. And the macro was kind of intuitive too, although I guess Terran would be the most for a Warcraft player, but it just seemed like the easiest, coming from a background for me of not, having to play a macro game too heavily. So you competed in that until about 2013, is that correct? You played for about 3 years competitively, 2 or 3 years in StarCraft 2?
I think more, let me see.
Maybe till 2014, something like that. I have 2011 to 2013, but,
I thought maybe it was 2014 or 2015, where there was a year where I was doing half and half. So half partaking in tournaments as a pro player and half casting them.
Right.
So for a while I was doing both, and people kept asking me, so are you one or are you the other? And I was like, I am both a caster and a player. And then eventually I decided to stop playing tournaments entirely, and then instead just cast from that moment.
How did you get into that? I think I read it was like Home Story Cup or something you casted first, if I'm remembering that correct, or maybe a different cup. That was your first cast, and you just sort of just did that as a one-off and happened to enjoy it, or how'd you get into that?
So that was actually shortly after I started playing Starcraft II. I was like maybe 1 month into it, or like a few weeks. Take was organizing a Home Story Cup, which back then was like a very small thing in these very tiny apartments.
Yes.
With just few players being there, most of them playing online. And his co-caster at the time had to cancel at the last minute. So he was looking for someone, and then maybe Rotty or someone suggested me. So I went to Germany last minute to cast with him.
Yeah.
And that was my introduction to the kind of casting. And I thought that, for me, I thought that would be a good experience to see how everybody plays and get better myself from commentating. I remember it was funny, during one of the breaks, I played on one of the computers there because I really like watching them play, really made me want to play. And then I played, maybe it was Dimaga, and I won. And he was a player at the tournament there, and I was just a caster. Like a lot of players, they were like, oh shit, like this guy is for real. And so that was kind of my introduction, but it's not really like where I started, I would say. Later in my career, so like first of all in StarCraft I was not nearly as successful as in Warcraft 3. I was like a decent player. I went to some tournaments but never really like performed like crazy. So there was a tournament in Texas called Lone Star Clash that I went to, and it was an 8 players tournament where there was like just insane players compared to me, like much higher skill, and I lost pretty early. And then I was offered to cast a game, and I was like, I mean, I got nothing to do, like the player I was hanging out with at this tournament was still competing, so I was like, oh, I might as well keep myself busy. So I cast a match, and later I get a DM. I thought the match went well, that I did what I could to describe the strategies and stuff. And later I get a DM from Carmack, and he's like, oh, I was watching and I really enjoy your commentary and stuff. Would you like to come and try and cast, or like do some analysis at one of the Intel Extreme Masters that we got coming up? I was like, yeah, sure. So he offered me to be at what they called, it was maybe the first one in StarCraft, the analysis desk, where we never cast. We just talk about the games before and after they happen. So it was me and Jait Kell, the guy from Pure Ownage, hosting the desk.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's the first time I met him. I didn't even know actually about this thing. I learned about it later on.
I was obsessed with that show when I was a kid. When I was like 8 years old, I used to watch that over and over again.
But you know what's funny? Like I think I had watched that show, but I kind of forgot about it. I wasn't so much about it. But I knew though, because I was into Counter-Strike, about FPS Dog.
Yes.
And that guy was my hero. And I met him eventually. And I was like, oh my God, I'm such a big fan. And I follow him on Twitter. He follows me and stuff. And I met him a bunch of times. He's so cool. That guy is so cool.
I had no idea about that. That's so cool, man.
Yeah, so I went there, and he was the host, and he was QXC as well, a Terran player who's also, he's like, he's pretty big mouth, like, but he's really funny, and it was good banter on the desk. We did a good job. And then I think after that, I kind of became a regular of when they would do a desk like this. There was another one in Germany where it was like me, Jorosar, and maybe Harstem, if I remember correctly. Not 100% about this one. But I remember that I wanted to try and cast. For me, that was the next evolution. Like desk stuff was cool, but I wanted to try and cast. I listened to the cast and I was like, I think I could do this and it would be fun. So I asked them and they gave me my shot. And that's, I think after the first event that I did from there, I only went on to cast pretty much. And then the position on the desk as analyst became a rotation between the casters and maybe some of the pro players that are there and stuff now. So that was my introduction, to casting. And at the time I was still competing as well.
Right, yeah, double duty. Were you casting with Rotterdam mostly there as a duo, or were you just sort of doing whoever they'd put you with as a duo? Because nowadays, if I understand correct, you cast most of the time with Rotterdam as a duo, correct?
No, actually, I mean, we're one of the popular duo, and like people will ask for us to cast, but I don't cast with Roddy actually that often. It really depends. Like it depends tournaments, like who they hire, then it's up to them who they pair with whom. And most tournaments, they have like a big rotation, so you'll cast with everyone and stuff, So it's like, it's kind of easy.
Yeah.
So initially, I did those desks jobs. I don't remember what was the first tournament that I properly cast. I mean, just cast. Maybe it was one of the ones in Germany, and I think I just cast a little bit with everybody. But then eventually, WCS got announced, which was the big new circuit on the scene. and they were gonna do in-studio casts in Germany, and they really wanted me to cast because I was one of the guys that they liked and they thought was available. The problem is that you had to come to Germany for a while, and I was not too hot about like going to another country to live there for a while and then cast. I really liked my setup at home. I knew it wouldn't be nearly as good like if I went elsewhere. But eventually, I agreed to go, and I went there and I started casting with Kailaris, and we were like, it made a lot of noise. I thought we were like very popular in the scene. People really liked our cast together. It's like this weird combo of like this English dude with this French guy, and they just like have these weird jokes together, and like somehow it worked. You know, there was like a good chemistry. So that's where really I started commentating a lot more from this point onwards. And yeah, eventually I started doing more and more tournaments, like back and forth. There was a couple WCS seasons where I qualified for the round of 32, and then I would play the round of 32, and if I lost, then I would be casting offline from the round of 16, for example.
Right.
That kept happening. And it's weird because before that, I wasn't even performing that well, but as soon as I started casting, I started playing a lot better, and I felt like it helped my game a lot, so I embraced it. I was like, I want to cast more and I want to play more because they're kind of helping one another.
Yeah.
Like my playing at high level helps me cast well, and my casting helps me play even better. And eventually I got a little bit into Heroes of the Storm as well.
Yeah.
Kind of like the game. And ESL offered me a job to be a commentator full-time for both Warcraft 3 and, Starcraft 2 and Heroes of the Storm. And I had to move to Germany. And again, at first I wasn't too hot, but then eventually, you know, they baited me. They showed me the suitcase full of cash, and they kind of convinced me to move to Germany, and and then I moved.
Yeah, because back then, for at least the maybe 2012 to 2014, 2015 StarCraft 2, maybe people in Warcraft don't quite understand the scope of how big these events were. There was no, once 2014, 2015 came around, then Counter-Strike got big, and we had, of course, League of Legends and Dota 2. But at the time when the beta first ended for StarCraft 2, that was, if I understand correctly, like the esport. The events were the biggest they've ever had. The crowds were the biggest. The viewer bases were the biggest. So those were some big scope events that you were doing at the time, right?
Yeah, for sure. You mean for StarCraft 2? Or?
Yeah, early StarCraft 2 when you were first sort of getting into these big events, right?
So I didn't get into StarCraft 2 as the game was released.
Yeah.
So like the number one esport game, StarCraft 2, I don't think I particularly experienced. I think when I got into StarCraft 2, it was kind of already like declining.
Okay.
And then it was maybe like the rise of like League of Legends and stuff kind of taking over as like the big esports game, and then eventually Counter-Strike and stuff. But yes, there were a lot of people for sure, like to a lot of the StarCraft events that I went to, like when I would play, I went to Korea eventually, for StarCraft 2, and then I would see like a big field arena with people or like venues watching. I don't think it was ever really quite as big as Brood War, though. Brood War has always been like the master number one game in Korea. But yeah, like there were big tournaments. Like MLGs,
yes,
I think were really big. MLGs kind of reminded me of the old school tournaments that we had in War 3, where it was like you got 64 players from all around the world just coming to this one tournament here to clash with one another, and there's only going to be one single winner. So yeah, like the game was definitely, when I joined, maybe past its prime, like / golden era, but it was still really big, I'd say, compared to a lot of games out there.
For sure. And you're, of course, still casting StarCraft 2 on occasion. I'm not sure when your last event was, but you're still all involved in StarCraft 2 and casting when you get the invite and everything like that. When was your last StarCraft 2 event? Was it recent, or because I, of course, don't follow the scene too closely?
Yeah. So in 2019, I think I cast quite a bit of StarCraft. I did a lot of events. But then in 2020, I got offered at the start of the year. I think maybe there was Nation Wars at the very start of the year. And then there was Katowice immediately after Anaheim. And Katowice was the first tournament where like no audience was allowed, which we learned one day before the tournament started.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they had already traveled there. They couldn't even get into the venue. So that was really sad.
Yeah.
After that, all of the events were online. And I think I got asked to do the first DreamHack that happened online after that. Because, that was transferred from offline to online.
Yep.
But I couldn't do it because I was getting surgery. So I said, no, I can't. But for the next one, I'd love to be involved. And then they didn't end up asking me for the next one. So like in StarCraft, there's a lot of very good commentators. So you're never guaranteed to get a job.
Yes. Right.
That's like you never take anything for granted. You never know what might happen, like if they're gonna ask you or not. I know that a lot of people like my commentary, but it doesn't mean that I'm gonna be doing every event. So like
Right.
when that happens, you keep yourself busy with something else, and that's what I did. So I did even more Warcraft 3 streaming and Warcraft 3 casting and organized my own tournaments to keep myself busy because I wasn't being asked to do this Starcraft, or at least this Starcraft tournament. And then it happened again with the next 2 DreamHacks. And I was a little bit surprised because I let them know that I wanted to cast, actually. I was like, even though I'm doing a lot of Warcraft 3, I still would like to cast some Starcraft. But I didn't get asked. And then now it happened again with IEM Katowice.
Right.
I told them not long ago that I would love to cast, and they still didn't ask me. And I sent an email, I think it was earlier today, actually, to one of the guys. And I was like, I'd still like to cast if possible for the next one. So we'll see. At the end of the day, I can't do much more than tell them that I'm interested in casting it. But if they don't want to ask me to cast it, then it's entirely up to them. But I often get tweets. I got one yesterday, which is what made me want to email.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah. So let me look it up.
Yeah, I think I saw one that you commented on yesterday because, of course, I'm sure you like casting both Warcraft 3 and Starcraft 2, but the events are, with being the newer games, Starcraft 2 are going to be the bigger events. Do you have a preference for casting one or the other, or do you like casting them both equally, sort of thing, Warcraft and Starcraft?
No, I like casting both a lot, to be honest. It's like, I think casting is a lot of fun these days. I enjoy it maybe even more than playing itself. And it's really like what I've put a lot of effort into. I pulled up the tweets.
Yep.
So somebody tweeted to me, "Why are you not a commentator for Katowice this year? We miss you." And I think it's maybe because I hopped in the chats and then like I wrote a bunch of stuff, and some people were like, "Oh, ToD, like why is he not casting and stuff anymore?" So I replied, "Thanks, dude. I would love to cast some Starcraft again when given the opportunity." So it's, it explains that I just simply haven't been asked. And I said, it's not up to me. If it was up to me, then I'd be casting Starcraft more often, especially because it's like a very big rotation. Like, they have so many casters, so they only do like, 2-3 days or whatever, like each. So it's not like you're taking on something that's like, 2 weeks long when you're always casting and stuff. So I think it'd be fun. But to go back to your question of what was the last thing I cast Katowice, and then there was no more offline events that I can remember. And not long ago, maybe like a month ago, somebody contacted me about casting an online cup with Roddy. And he was putting up a prize pool, and he was also like giving us a bit of money to me and Roddy to cast. And I was like, absolutely, let's do it. Actually, more than a bit, it was a decent amount. So I was like, sure. And I cast that whole tournament. It was just a day long with him, and it was a lot of fun. That's when I was really like, oh, I really want to cast some more Starcraft again. Like, I'd forgotten how fun it can be.
Yeah.
I do the occasional cast with Roddy on his channel. Like on Mondays, he casts the Open Cups. So sometimes I wait until it's like 7 p.m. and then I message him. I'm like, all right, let's do the last few matches of the night with him.
Right, yeah.
And it's a lot of fun every time.
Yeah, and it's probably something when you just like playing Warcraft 3 or Starcraft 2 quite a bit, it might be something you get burnt out on. So if you're doing events for, 4 or 5 years in one game, then eventually you get burnt out, but you take a little bit of a break from casting Starcraft 2, and then eventually this is the game I want to cast all the time. I imagine there's a big feeling of that, just being burnt out and then finally getting the taste of that again, and just give me every event that I can get, sort of thing. Cool. I'm wondering, you mentioned this a couple times actually, and just in passing, I'm wondering a little bit about, we've talked about in chat a couple times about the parallels between RTS and poker. When did you get into poker? And then maybe we get a little bit into the parallels of that, because we've talked, of course, about Elky so far, and I know there's I can't always remember the name, Lex Veldis, might be mispronouncing that. Veldhouse, yeah. He was a Brood War player, and then there's a couple of other guys. There's one guy who streams Warcraft 3. A lot of connections between RTS and poker, so I'm wondering about your beginnings of that a little bit.
I think a lot of RTS players from the old days, they ended up to go and play poker for sure. There's many that are like pretty well known. Tillerman ended up playing poker, and I think made quite a bit of money of it, at least so I hear. And real-time strategy games such as Starcraft or Starcraft Brood War or Warcraft 3, they're strategy games of incomplete information. So, you need to scout, you need to figure out what you're up against, and then you need to develop your strategy to counter most of what they do. And there are definitely some similarities with poker. Poker is a game of incomplete information. You need to try and figure out what the opponent has if you can play every time like you know what he has, then you're going to be making money in the long run, you know? That's kind of how it works. Even though the game has changed a lot and nowadays you play what is called like your range, aka the assortment of hands that you could have against his range.
Yeah.
Which is determined by, you know, the bet sizings or the positions that they're going to open from, or like they're going to re-raise, or their tendencies in general. So it's just, at the end of the day, it's just another strategy game, really, like purely a strategy game where you purely need to practice a lot and perfect your skills. It does require some different qualities. You know, like if you tilt in Warcraft 3, you're going to lose some ladder and some MMR. In poker, you're going to lose more than that.
Yeah.
Your bankroll and a lot of money. So there are definitely, you need to be better at self-control. It takes different skills. But there are a lot of similarities, and I can see how there was a lot of appeal for these guys, especially because a lot of them, they undertook this challenge when it was much easier than now. Like today, poker is 1,000 times harder than it was in 2000. Like it's not even funny.
Yeah, I think there's a big correlation. I'm a very novice poker player, but I do enjoy it, just the idea of it, and I've done a little bit of reading on it and stuff. It seems there's a similar idea of early RTS games and people being very intuitive and sort of throwing random stuff out, and then the early poker days of maybe 10, 15 years ago, and now with computers and everyone understanding, as you point out, ranges and all that stuff, whatever, betting odds and favors and all that stuff, whatever the lingo is, but people seem to have much better understanding of the game nowadays, and there's almost been a shift in meta, which if you don't understand poker very well, you might think like, don't you just throw chips on the table and then the guy with the better hand wins? No, there's a bunch of strategy to it, which is such an interesting thing to learn and develop. How long have you played poker for?
You know what's funny? Like, I just remembered the first time I saw poker being played, and I was kind of introduced to the game, and I believe it was WCG 2004 with some of the American guys. I think they were in a room playing poker.
Okay.
And then I went there and they explained me the game, and I was a complete idiot. So eventually I got a good hands. And then I turned around, I was smiling and showing my hand, and then they all folded and they laughed. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, well, we know you have a good hand. You just smiled and like you showed your hand. So that was maybe the first time that I learned about it during WCG 2004, but then I didn't really play for a very long time.
Right.
And eventually I started picking it up here and there, like for fun. And I really only started playing a little bit more from maybe 2010, 2008, something like that. Like very, very, I guess, late compared to like most of my Warcraft 3 career. I would say, though, I don't think I'm a very good poker player. Like I'm pretty bad, like lifetime. Like back then I would go to the casino and like, lose a couple hundred here and there. Like I never really understand how to play or like proper strategy. I wasn't studying hard. I was just like a mass gamer, like that's like stuck on 40% win rates.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of sucks. Like I can do better than that. But eventually I started studying more, and I've definitely improved quite a bit. I think I still suck overall. I think poker is one of those games I could play 10 years,
right,
get somewhat good and make money, and I would still think that I suck. But I definitely study more than I did before, and I take it like pretty seriously when I play, even though I kind of play for fun at the same time. So I don't take it like, I'm not like super hardcore, like studying all the time. But actually, like, this is completely random, but today, so there's these ranges, like in every position that you are, you're supposed to open certain ranges. I can't show it's too close because it's like kind of confidential, but today I went to a print shop, and I want to have some of these ranges to look at so I can memorize them. So this is one of them. I don't know if it will render very well. This is one of the range. So this is like every poker hands that you're supposed to open and play from like a certain position.
Right.
I see that my camera.
It's just a list of every sort of hand you can get in
every
a row,
hand, and then the ones in the center is the ones that you're supposed to play or re-raise with from like a certain position and stuff. And I'm trying to study some of these, and I've already memorized a lot of them, but there's so many of them because every situation is different. At a table, you could have 9 players, you could have 6 players, and then if the player under the gun, that's the first to act at a player with 6 table, or like actually on any table. So under the gun, if he's the one to play first, if you're in the small blind, the ranges that you're supposed to re-raise with are going to be very different.
Yes.
If the guy that opened was under the gun, or if he was in the cutoff, which is the position right next to the button. So it's like, you kind of need to learn these, and then adapts your play depending on the opponents. And it's a very complicated game. I think the skill ceiling of poker is just insanely high. And I kind of like that, like playing that for fun here and there. Like I could see myself someday maybe like take a month or something off gaming and then just try to like play poker for like a full month to really improve hard and a lot in a month, and then just go back to a regular like streaming schedule. But I think someday I really probably want to try and do that just for fun. But I always think I want to do that about stuff, like I always like before I got one of my latest knee injury, which I got doing during jiu-jitsu. I really was into martial arts, and I wanted to go to Thailand and do like a 1 month Muay Thai, a hardcore like training. And I was like trying to plan it, but it was so hard because I couldn't figure out which places had like good internet. Ideally, I would like to train Muay Thai during the day and then at night stream 2 hours of Warcraft 3 on NetEase from Thailand. So I was like trying to plan that, but I never found out if the internet was good enough where I wanted to go. So I never did it, and I kind of regret it now. Like these days, it's not really possible. Who knows? Maybe down the line, it will happen.
Yeah, you seem to be somebody with a lot of interest. I'm kind of like that a little bit too, where I have a lot of interest, but I never tend to get to the top of any field. But you've sort of taken a lot of your interest, and even though you say you're not the greatest poker player, you are on a team that is a poker team, if I understand. So you're, and you play some high stakes games and high level games and stuff. So you've really
no, I don't.
No high stakes.
Me. No. Yeah, like so they're a poker team which also does this sport, but they hired or like I joined them as a Warcraft pro.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I didn't join them like in any relation to poker. I like poker, so my deal with them included some coaching, which helped me get better.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't play high stakes. Like when I play live, I play 1-3, so it's like a $300 buy-in. And when I play online, I play like 10, 25 cents. So that's $25 a table. So like 4 tables. So I don't play high limits at all. And I don't think I'm very good, but
was that just a coincidence then that you happened to get picked up for Warcraft for a poker team, or did you said you had some relation to them before, or is that just a big coincidence that it happened to be like that?
So a lot of very good players, they used to be gamers. So I think a lot of them knew me from Warcraft. And in 2019, I was in Vegas for the World Series, and I got to meet a lot of the best players in the world that once upon a time either were Starcraft or Warcraft 3 people, and they knew about me. And I knew about them because I know who they are in poker. They're like some of the best players in the world. Like some of these guys have like 14 millions in tournament cashes, like it's absurd. And they were like, oh yeah, no, we used to play Warcraft 3. Like one of them was like, oh yeah, I used to play like 4v4 and stuff all the time, Coin Nova all the way. I was like, oh my God, this is like crazy. I would have never thought, but that's where the, like, we always say like the top RTS or the top guys in poker, like a lot of them might be gamers. Yeah, it's true actually for some of them. Yeah. Not all of them, but there's definitely a bunch of people out there. They're good at one and they played also the other. And that's just kind of how it went down. They kind of knew of me, and then one day they reached out to me, and because I was playing in the Meisterschaft, which is important for them, like for any like German team as it should be. Yeah. They wanted to hire me to be on the team, and immediately I was like, well, hell yeah.
Yeah, do they have other like gamers other than poker players on the team? Do they have any other big names? Or you're obviously the only Warcraft 3 player, but do they pick up any other sort of gamers?
They have a Counter-Strike team, which also plays in the Meisterschaft.
Oh, okay,
so that's really their priority is the Meisterschaft. And they don't have a Dota team. That's the only other game that's in the Meisterschaft, I believe.
Cool. Right on. Yeah, and you've been with them for a couple of, or like a year now?
1 year.
1 year?
Yeah, 1 year.
Cool. Yeah, this is your first team for like a little while, right? Since XMG in 2013, apparently. And that's at least what I have written down. Cool. So, yeah, we've pretty much gone through a lot of your history. I'm wondering now just a couple thoughts on the sort of current scene, and then I think we can, of course, plug your tournament and then maybe wrap up. So what are your views on the current sort of tournament landscape as opposed to when you were, a full-time pro gamer back in the day? What do you think of the scene? What do you think of, the different teams we have, the top players? Just general thoughts on the scene.
I think it's kind of crazy what happens with the circuits that kind of came out of nowhere, which... even though, Reforge was a big fail, it did bring a certain hype with it. Yes. And even though now it died down, like by now it has died down, that hype. And actually, like, there's been a lot of bad comments about the game as well. with that hype came the announcement of many tournaments. If there is no Reforge, maybe there is no Meisterschaft. If there is no Reforge, there's definitely no ESL Pro Tour. So that's at least one of the positives to come out of Reforge, is that we got a circuit like the ESL Pro Tour, which I think has been amazing, even though it ended up being online, and it should have been offline, and I would have been the hypest thing ever, all these offline events with all these great players.
Yeah.
Finally seeing them go head to head with very little ping, and hopefully these things as well. But yeah, no, I like the tournament landscape currently. Like, there's a lot of tournaments, there is online weeklies, there is everything. There's like always these invitationals popping up. If Back to Warcraft feels like organizing something, they'll do it. If I feel like organizing something, I'll do it. There's people making show matches all the time. I really like that, the scene is as vibrant and active as it currently is, for sure. I think it's a very good thing. Like, we're fortunate to have a scene the way it is for a game that has Warcraft 3's viewership, which, even though it's not the smallest, it's definitely not the biggest either out there.
For sure. And one more question. This is kind of funny. I have a little bit of an anecdote for this. I thought you had the name Romantic Human on ladder for a little bit, like, a couple years ago, and maybe you kept it. It was on NetEase, I think. And I thought it was just because you were a big fan of Romantic. But then watching your video, I realized that was actually a nickname that you had before, Romantic or Fortitude was even in the scene. But do you have a favorite player currently that you're into? Maybe one of the other human players in China or something like that?
I really like Sok.
Yes.
I think he's been performing really well in tournaments, so I really like watching his replays and seeing how well he's doing. Yeah, I had multiple nicknames back in the day. And because I'm French, they called me Romantic Human. And I also had Slippers Human, Tuo Xie in Chinese.
Yeah.
Because I would wear flip-flops everywhere. And it was 40 degrees and they had no
camo
AC,
shorts.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they called me like flip-flop or whatever, Slippers Human.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and Sok's my favorite player, actually. Even though I'm an orc player, I love Sok. He's my favorite player for sure. Your views on balance currently. We can go as long or as short on this as you want, but just general thoughts on balance currently. We've had a decent amount of patches recently.
It's funny because we just did a talk show, like the first one with the French craft guy. So it was the same as a town hall, but in French.
Okay, yeah.
And there was really good guys on there. There was Toxie, there was Wiz, and then we talked a bunch about balance. And I was explaining that it's kind of weird because everybody's unhappy, it feels like.
Right.
And I was trying to explain why. Like, why is everybody unhappy, or like a majority of people are unhappy? I feel like it's because we were so used of a certain meta which was there for so many years.
Right.
And in our minds, it was very clear what needs to be done. Like if you played human, you really wanted destroyers to be nerfed because you were tired of having to make like 15 towers per base that still would die, and then you would just die after that.
Yep.
If you were orc, you had talents coming out of your eyes at this point. Like, you just couldn't see talents anymore. Like, you were so fed up with it. And I think a lot of us, we had unrealistic expectations around what a patch would bring. Like, we just thought that the bad things in the game were going to be fixed and we would just keep all the good things.
Yes.
But instead, Blizzard just did like a giant shuffling of things where they weakened some of the strongest units, they buffed some of the weakest units, they reworked so many heroes, they reworked items without really ever adding any maps for the most part. There was like only very few changes, I would say, on that side. And I think a lot of us took for granted the good things that were there, and we just had unrealistic expectations. And that's why now, if you're a human player, like, and you think, you think about the old Tri-Hero and the old Clap and Bolt, you're going to be like, what is this piece of garbage Mountain King that I have that's doing absolutely nothing? But that's the thing, the game has changed in many ways, so you just need to play differently.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of us have a hard time accepting is that the game is just very different. There's still some very big imbalances. There is, in my opinion, even though they changed items, and I liked a lot of the item things that they changed, I think that the game is played at such a high level now that items play a key point, really a key point in the game as everybody gets better.
Agreed,
as everybody's micro understanding of strategy and everything gets better. The items are so important. They are more important than ever. And I really hope that something's going to be done with this, because nowadays there's so many games that I see, and I'm like, if you invert the items here, you invert the winner in that game.
Yes.
Like all the X-Lord Happy games that I cast, I feel like at least 2 of the series, Happy is very good. I don't want to take anything away from him. He won solely on the items that he found. Like it's nuts. He just kept on getting insane items all the time, and then X-Lord got like not so good ones, and then he just like barely lost. It's like, it doesn't really make much sense. So it's very weird talking about balance these days, because on one hand, I know that I never want to be the guy that decides what is going to be changed, because then you get blamed for it, and I don't want that.
Yeah, of course.
I don't like that. Like I see a lot of bad comments about Remo these days. I'm like, guys, like, he didn't tell Blizzard, take all my changes and apply them. He just made a post with some of his changes. Like,
yeah,
don't blame the poor fucker. But yeah, like, I think some of the items definitely are going to have to be fixed. And I wish, for me, I would love to see Warcraft at its best potential, of which, in my opinion, we've gone in the right direction a couple of times, but we're still very far away from that. Like, there's not the most that's being done to make the game the best possible, to follow. Like, Reforged was a fail again. Like, the observer mode is just utter trash.
Yeah.
Back to Warcraft has to use their own observing UI. We have to use a W3 booster. Like, it's not good, but we make do. Like, the community is so awesome that they make so many things work. But yeah, about balance, many things are hard to accept. Again, like for me, it's hard to accept that my MK is like a shadow of his former self. It's hard to accept that a matchup like Night Elf, which used to be the most straightforward thing in the world, they would just play Demon Naga, like I said. You could Breaker Caster Mortar, and then you'd smash them with AD supply.
Yeah.
Now it's like they could open with any hero in the game. Firelord first, I've lost too many times of Hot recently.
Yep.
They mix in Pitlord third, where they use Hall of Terror on my Knights, which have Inner Fire. And then I'm like, do I dispel my Inner Fire Knights or not? I don't actually know to this moment.
Yeah.
You got Mountain Giants, which are borderline uncounterable.
I think everyone agrees with that now.
Yeah, they just don't do any damage, which for me is just a terrible game design. But then if you think about Mountain Giants, imagine they get really nerfed. Night Elf might suck and be really bad. So I do wish that there would be balance changes. I just don't want to be the guy that will be calling them. I do think that Human against Undead is a bit of a silly matchup, and I would like to see changes. I just don't know what. And again, I feel like it's an impossible job.
Yes.
But everybody is like so passionate about balance. But what really surprises me is that everybody's whining. There's almost nobody that's like, no, I think my race is in a pretty good place. No, I just see everybody complaining. And I think that's part of why, the reason is kind of because of what I explained earlier. We just took too many things for granted, and we thought they would never change. And now the game just changed in a big way. And we all look at the balance maybe with our own games a little too much, affecting our judgments. Whereas we really should be watching at the absolute top level what's happening. Like when Night Elf or Orc wins 2 tournaments in a row, or like any race really, and then you go to a channel of the streamer of that race, and then the entire chat is whining about the race being weak. I'm like, did you just not freaking watch, what these guys did?
Yeah.
But there's always going to be some asterisks. I also think we attach sometimes a little too much importance to who just won a tournament. Like, to win a tournament, you need to win 5 series. It's not the ultimate test of balance.
Yes.
It's not like a round robin that goes on for 2 weeks where everybody plays everybody, and then we get the definite winner, best player and best race. Like, it doesn't work like that. So yeah, balance is it's a crazy topic in Warcraft 3. It's the one that nowadays people talk a lot about. And I think it's okay to talk about it, but it's a very difficult topic because people also get offended quite a bit.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Like, if you talk about balance, it feels like you're taking away from someone, which is definitely something that for a long time I've ignored. I was just like, if you're undead, you're just basically a cheater. You have a cheat code enabled against human. Your wins don't count. But also, I would like to try and take away less from our opponent when I lose. But when I lose to undeads, most of the games, I just look at the game and I'm like, you were cheating. Like, there's no way this is legit.
Right.
So it's hard to find a just middle like this. And yeah, obviously there are big imbalances in the game that I do wish would get fixed. Mountain Giants and Undead against Human are 2 of the big problems in the game. For me, the item RNG is too much as well. Like, the difference between getting a ring and a claw is like It's so absurd. And as time passes by, it's only going to increase, that gap between ring and claw, as everybody keeps on getting better.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I feel like I'm just rambling, but I do hope that balance is going to be improved in the future. And it's just an impossible topic across the board.
Yes.
Like these days, night elves and undeads, all the ones that I hear around me, they're winning so much about this matchup. And it's so weird for me because in the history, usually it doesn't really happen very often. That's, something like that is going on in the scene. Usually, it's fairly one-sided. Like the orcs, they're winning about elves' talents.
Mm-hmm.
I guess for a long time, the night elves, they were complaining about human, maybe because they abused keeper a little too hard during that one patch and they forgot how to play the rest of the strategies.
Yep.
But very rarely do you hear so much fire about one matchup.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the middle of it. I play neither race, and I'm like, who's right here? Like, why are they both winning? Somebody's lying here. Like, somebody's right, but maybe they both have points, and the matchup just has changed in a way that neither of them likes it, so they just see it as imbalanced,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you have a lot of reasonable ideas on balance, and sometimes, of course, when you have a public opinion, they're always blown out of proportion. But I don't see anything there that's coming from a point of a player. I think it's really a lot of it is coming from the point of an analyzing the games themselves. Yeah, this is a weird meta for discussing balance, especially because we have so much diversity in heroes that we choose from, units that we choose from. Probably the most, at least in the last since 2010. That we've seen, maybe in the entirety of the game's history, really the most diversity. We see almost every unit from every race at this point, which is good for spectators, but not always good for players. And you made a really good point of, it may just be that people aren't used to this current meta, but it's really good for spectators. So then the issue is, do you balance? And again, the point on items as well. Really cool for spectators when one player gets a really cool item and then, oh my god, he got a crystal ball, what is he going to do with it, So it can be really exciting from a spectator point of view, but then terrible for players. So it's really teetering that balance of who do you favor. And right now it seems they're favoring more so the spectator, which of course, if Remo is involved in the balancing, then, he's a caster. So a spectator point.
I mean, it's a real headache to even think about one single change. Imagine if you try to make the items more balanced, like how would you even do it?
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it a lot. It's like, there's no perfect scenario. Like, take the starting consumable. It's like one of those that we've heard about the most.
Yeah, like
Terna stands. Yeah, Night Elf goes and Ancient of War creep the mercenary camp. Human does it as well. They have a Warden, you have an MK. It can be like that you get the 3 best possible items. So usually the big consumable will be a greater mana. And then maybe you'll get like a mantle or something for extra mana pull. And then maybe another mantle. You can get double mantle and greater mana. The opponent gets greater invuln. And then like, let's say on the Mountain King, if you find like double agility, sleepers of agility, you're like, you just hate that. It's just garbage overall. So it's just too big a difference. So now, if we think in terms of fixing that, imagine if you give every player the opportunity to choose their item from a tier.
Yes.
Then suddenly both the Warden and Mountain King are opening with greater mana every single game, which creates a great imbalance because they got such an easy level 2. But that's the thing, they both will have it. So then does it counteract one another enough? I still think that in any case, greater mana would still be too OP because it's 250 mana and it should be 200. Like mana still inverts 200 mana, like your way anyway.
Yeah.
With 50 charge and 2 charges, it's 200 total. So yeah, it shouldn't be 250. Like they reduced it from 300 to 250. It should be 200 already for greater mana. But would the game be balanced that way? I mean, it feels like we can't really know unless we tried it. Some people have suggested that you should get 2 or 3 items to pick from.
Yes.
So now instead of getting Scroll of the Beast, which is useless in most cases in this kind of game, in the start, at least for a very long time, you get to pick. Is it Scroll of the Beast? Is it Mana Steal? Or is it Greater Healing? It could help, but there will still be quite a bit of RNG. The way to completely remove the RNG is to give a player the choice, as they find the item, to pick exactly the one that they want. But then you remove RNG entirely. And as a player, I think it's a good thing because then the better player will, get the better ends of things. But is removing RNG from the game entirely a good thing for the spectator? Who knows? Like for me, I know that's change like that I wouldn't be opposed to, but also I know enough about games and the way the world works to know that this almost would never would be accepted.
Yes.
And like when I've talked about it before, most people's reaction to this suggestion was they were like repelled by this idea of like being able to select your item. But I feel like if you just sit down and think about it, you might realize that maybe it wouldn't be so bad. You know, like just give it a shot in your head. Picture an entire game where you just you just keep picking your items. I do think that the auras need to be reworked in a big way because like the auras on the big red. So I'm picturing a game where you can pick your own item, and also the items are actually balanced properly.
They're not crazy. Yeah, because you'd always pick Khadgars if you're not human, and if you're human, you'd always pick Endurance Aura for those auras, and you'd always pick Greater Mana. So if there was some where there was actually a choice and some skill that went into choosing it, not just I'm always going to get Claws +9 because I need it in Human Mirror or something like that. There was more, if they did lower down the range of the items and then again let you be able to choose them, I think that could be really interesting, almost from both a player and a spectator side of things, probably.
And the last option that I thought of, which is the one that is maybe the most realistic in all of these, is increasing the gold that you get from items.
Right.
And don't remember, they still need to get tuned up. We still need to change the rings a bunch. The auras on the big red camp still need to be changed. And this freaking mask, like the agility and intelligence one, like please, like this one better give me like 600 gold if I'm gonna sell it, because I'm really sad that I didn't get freaking unholy aura or endurance on that camp. So that's probably the most realistic scenario, I think. Like even Remo, I think, got behind this one after we talked about it a bunch of times. Like initially, I was mentioning that it should give a lot of gold. I still kind of maintain that. I think like a small increase in gold maybe wouldn't be enough. Maybe a bunch of other things need to change. Like if you already have an Archmage in Brilliant Sora, should you really have the option of finding a freaking Brilliant Sora on the map? Like it's very stupid. And the thing about picking it up and being able to sell it is that you still need to make a trip to the merchant.
Yes.
Which does not always fall in place very conveniently during one of your games. So what about an option to sell it right here on the spot by clicking on it and doing like sending it to the Shadow Realm to be sold on the black market or whatever? So yeah, there is a lot of things that could be done to make the game better, and I hope that some of these will be done, because right now the RNG is at times very absurd in this game, and I do wish it would be reduced, not necessarily erased from the game, even though I do think it would be one of the best case scenario if they just let you pick your items.
For sure. And there isn't a lot of games that have as much RNG as Warcraft, and it's almost really strange it's something that we've accepted to this extent. But you look at even games like, Counter-Strike or like, Starcraft II, I'm not sure if there's even any real RNG in that game. There may be damage ranges. I don't even think there's damage ranges in Starcraft II, is there? So there's really not any RNG at all in those sorts of games. Whereas Warcraft, there's a ton.
Yeah. There is RNG. I mean, I don't know if it's RNG, but there is some randomness in that sometimes you take a risk to try and counter what you think is going to be your opponent's strategy, and you don't have the full info.
Yes.
But it's obviously different. I heard that in Hearthstone, they reduce the RNG by giving you what I mentioned earlier, like a choice between certain things. But I don't play Hearthstone, so I can't attest to that. Right. But I heard from someone that they try and do that because before there was like a lot of RNG, and like it was sometimes felt a little too lucky. So they just give you a choice at some point between maybe 3 cards or whatever. I've never played Hearthstone in my life. So
I have about 20 minutes in that game, I think, logged.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's exciting for viewers, I think, RNG to an extent, which is what makes Warcraft such an interesting game. I remember when I was first watching the games, and I learned how to play the game through watching pros on YouTube, and I was always excited when they'd be creeping a camp because I didn't know what items they all dropped. I didn't know the drop tables or the tiers. I was like, oh, what's he going to get now? So I found it really exciting as sort of an initial viewer, but there needs to be some balance where the games aren't skewed, especially human matchups currently. Undead Mirror, as you pointed out, with Xlord and Happy. Xlord even said that himself. We interviewed him on the card once, me and Bidu, and he said it himself. He feels undead mirrors are purely determined by the items, and I'm sure Happy has said the same as well. So I do think there should be some sort of balancing towards that side of things, and maybe that would be a good step in the right location, possibly.
Yeah.
Cool. So I want to be able to talk about your tournament a little bit, but let's segue into that through plans for the future. If you have any, you're going to continue streaming. Maybe going to become a Dota 2 pro now. I don't know. You have any other plans for the future?
I think more of the same. Like I plan on continuing to stream Warcraft 3 and also cast if there are casting opportunities. I organize my own tournaments, which we're going to talk about. The next one I'm organizing next. I would love to cast some Starcraft II. I still think it's possible. Again, I sent an email today voicing that I'd be interested in casting the next thing that they've got going. So we'll see if they give me my shot there. I do think it would be fun. I do think I'd do a good job and people would like it.
I've heard nothing but good things, by the way, in the chat, on your Twitter, people in chats talking about Starcraft. Nothing but good things. So, it's really on the TOs. It's not on the viewers, I'm sure, that maybe you're not at some of these events.
Yeah, like I said, there is a lot of casters. It's hard for them to pick. Like I wasn't part of the casting crew this time, but I'm sure that there's some other good commentators that also wanted to cast and that didn't get their chance. It's kind of the way it is. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So we can end it off, of course, by talking about your tournament. It is ToD's Tag Team Tournament number 3. I got the Matcherino that I'm going to bring up, but while I show the Matcherino, if you just want to talk a little bit about it, we've had 2 already. And I'll show, of course, the players, and we can talk about how they can contribute to the prize pool and all that stuff. So let me bring this up. Ba-boom, boom. Hopefully this works. Pray for me.
Yeah, so I've organized multiple tournaments before, and I've organized show matches a bunch of times on Starcraft. I started doing some Warcraft tournament when I got back into the game. The Team Warcraft Invitational was definitely the biggest one because it had over 7,000, I think, in prize pool or something like really high.
Right.
Then after that, I did some small tag team. I did an invitational, then another tag team. And this time I wanted to wait until host bots were around because I do think it's going to make the game a lot better to do a global tournament. Spectator-wise, I anticipate a couple headaches with the ping and some arguments here and there, but I've kind of tried to warn people as much as possible and been very transparent about the fact that there's going to be some delay and we're going to be playing cross-server. So I hope that the players show some patience and are willing to play the game. Kind of like, they know what they signed up for.
Yes.
But yeah, I wanted to do something that involved 2-on-2 because I think 2-on-2, like, there is no better game in the world for 2-on-2. I love Starcraft 2, but in 2-on-2, I just don't like it at all. It's purely for solo that I like Starcraft. 2-on-2 in Warcraft 3 is absolutely amazing. Even though these days I got a little bit burnt out and I don't play it much myself mostly because of Mountain Giants. But I'm excited for the 2-on-2. And so I wanted to organize something and I wanted to involve 2-on-2 and solo. So I came up with this tag team format where there's 2 players per team and they play in a 2-on-2 up first against one another, and then both players they play one another like from the enemy team. So that's 1 2-on-2 and then 4 solos after that. We're going to be doing crowdfunding for that, and I even reinvested the money that I won in the W2 Champions season 3 and 4. So that was like 120 and then 240. So that's part of the initial 500 that goes into the prize pool. And yeah, we're doing crowdfunding on Matcherino to try and build up a prize pool. I've kind of told the players that I'm expecting, or like we're shooting for a goal of at least 2,000. I hope we reach that because if you look at the lineup, I feel like the tournament definitely deserves that. And I'm going to be very open and easy about it schedule-wise because it's a global tournament. It's going to be open schedule. So I make the groups. I tell them, you guys have to play this match this week, and then they schedule together whenever they can. And if I have to wake up at 3 a.m. to cast Moon and Lin taking on somebody, then I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. I don't care. Like,
for sure.
Whatever. Like the matches, I just want them to happen in good conditions for the players in terms of hours. We'll try to find the best compromise in terms of ping. And yeah, the people that signed up, like, I was a little bit surprised, honestly. I wasn't sure, like, if everybody was going to be interested, but right off the bat, Soin and Lola had said yes. Ark and Hitman signed up. Then we had Thunder and Mikhail pretty quickly, Sok and Chimiko. Cooper and Johnny Cage, they were not sure initially, but then they said okay. I had to talk quite a bit to Vortex to make him and his brother sign up, and I think it's so awesome that we have a team with 2 brothers in Vortex Lucifron and another one in Thunder and Mikhail. Imagine if we get like that matchup happen, that would be so sick. But yeah, we got Krav and Starbucks signed up. They're very good in 2-on-2. Spiral Inside, another good team. Foggy and Hawk in there. Wiz and said 2 Night Elves, Starshape and Tarzan, very good in 2-on-2. We got 2 Chinese teams. Sadly, none of the very big profile players in China seemed really interested. I kind of put out a message on social media, but none of them reached out. So the Chinese teams is Cine and Pink and Xiaokai and 15 Sui. So that's still some good representation for them. Chic and Bizarre, also really good in 2-on-2, are in there. And then finally, we've only got the 16th team. It's Moon and Lin. So that team got a lot of people hyped about them playing in it. And yeah, I've been talking with Moon the last couple of days, and I'm very happy about seeing these guys take part in this. I hope it's going to be a good experience without any issues. And I'm going to draw the groups for this tomorrow at 3 p.m. on my stream.
Tomorrow at 3 p.m. Very cool. Yeah, that's exciting, man. And of course, in the chat, !tag team. You can find the match arena, you can find the Liquipedia, and you can contribute. And it will be, if you're on YouTube, it'll be down in the description. The link to the match arena, you guys can contribute. And there are other ways, I believe, retweeting some stuff. You can see it all in the right bar. You can follow some stuff, and you get free money added to the prize pool. So go do that. It's free money for the players that you enjoy watching. And this is really how tournaments are working nowadays. And this is a pretty cool format, man. The fact that you got Moon and Lin, some of these other teams, this is really exciting. This is very exciting. This is a great tournament.
Yeah, and I think actually I didn't explain about this yet, but I'm focusing on so many aspects of the tournament. I really wanted to have like a good map pool. Mm-hmm. So I've been talking a lot to the map makers on their Discord. They're also they're the ones talking to WT Champions about what maps are going to be on WT Champions next season.
Yeah.
So the map pool is subject to change, and it will almost entirely for 2-on-2, but maybe also a little bit in solo. All of the maps that will be played in these tournaments, they're going to be in the WT Champions map pool. So it means if you want to practice for this, since it's going to be played on the Flow hotspots, you can also practice on WT Champions purely and get games in. So imagine the next season is supposed to start on March 5th, right? Mm-hmm. Or around that.
Right.
My tournament start March 8th. Imagine the 2-on-2 ladder with all of these guys playing all the time and practicing one another. It's going to be nuts to watch, like them stream and play each other all the time, practice for the tournament, and then play in the tournament. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we kind of missed something like that in a way.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I got reminded of that feeling by the last WT Champions playoffs, which for me was the most hyped tournament that I've experienced in a very long time. Everybody was so hyped. There were so many viewers. It was so sick. I was like, we need more like that. Like back in the day, we got hyped about WC3L. It was every week. You had your favorite teams playing. You could follow them. We don't have that anymore. For some reason, the W3IL didn't catch the hype as much with the teams. And there's like a lot of top players missing. So I was trying to organize something that maybe could remind me of that, if ever temporarily. So I'm doing my best to make that happen. I do think that the next ladder season is going to be sick because all of these guys are going to be practicing not just 2-on-2, but in solo as well.
Yeah.
And I cannot wait. I think it's going to be so hype.
It's going to be very, very exciting. And yeah, man, everyone should go contribute, at least do the free contribution. And of course, check it out when it is streamed. As you said, it's going to be scattered out to work with the schedule of the players, which is really cool because you've talked a lot about how, tournament organizers in the past haven't been that fair to players. So the fact that you're going to get as fair a host as possible, we're going to try to get you as much prize pool as possible, whatever time works.
Yeah.
And just trying to make it as best as it possibly can be for the competitors, and then the viewers will always enjoy as long as they get any games. If you get to see Moon and Lin, you're always going to enjoy it, even if you, like you said, have to wake up at 3 a.m. for it. So I think it's a really cool format, and I hope it continues. And that's awesome,
most tournaments don't do a drawing still. They just announce the groups. Mm-hmm. Only the best tournaments do an actual live drawing, aka W3 Champions playoffs and my tournaments.
Dust League, we do the live drawings, although Dust League is
but it's rigged by Bidu,
so yeah, of course. All right, cool, man. Well, thank you very much for the interview. I appreciate it so much. As I said earlier, I'm very much underqualified to interview someone of your stature, so I very much appreciate you taking the time.
No, you're not.
Well, cheers, man. And, you always make sure when people end a podcast with you or an interview with you, think very hard about the shout-outs. You can take a moment if you'd like to, but I'll give you the last words. Any shout-outs you'd like. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all the people that help keep this scene alive. With at the very top of that list, I think back to Warcraft and WT Champions, but there's so many more, really. I think Pat did a sick job even with the booster. There's Warcraft 3 info. Anyone that's enthusiastic about Warcraft 3, then I like you. So shout out to you. Thanks to the ToD crew, all the people that always follow me. I see some of them in the chat here. If you guys want to follow me, I'm ToD on Twitch, ToD Gaming on YouTube, and Johan Merlo on Facebook and Instagram. So I guess the best one's probably my Twitch and my Twitter, where I post the most. I guess my YouTube, actually. I've been doing a lot of content, not just games, but I've been doing a ton of interviews. One is with you, one is Bidu, we had Kalaris. Mikael did an interview. Neo was the first one, I believe, as well. So we got the town halls on there. I'm making tutorials. I just recorded a sick tutorial, by the way, which might also be posted on Back to Warcraft. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, that's about it.
Very cool. And all those links will be in the description down below if you are watching on YouTube. And yeah, no episode next week, but we'll be back on April 11th for episode 9. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.